At my daughter's funeral, the priest leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Don't go home." He slipped a small note into my pocket. "The truth is inside. Come to the vineyard." Midnight, alone. I was stunned, but before I could respond, my phone started vibrating. 3 messages from my son-in-law, each more urgent than the last. "Don't listen to anyone at the church. Go home, right now. The lawyers are waiting." His tone alone pushed me to drive to the vineyard, where I discovered a truth even more terrifying than grief itself. Thank you for being here. I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Right now, drop your location or what you're up to in the comments below. A quick heads up, while this story draws from themes, we all recognize certain details have been dramatized to emphasize the lesson. Focus on the meaning behind it. That's what truly counts. I am Maxwell Theron Robertson, 72 years old, a retired Superior Court judge who spent 3 decades sentencing criminals, and now I stood at my daughter's grave in the rain, wondering why I felt no tears, only the cold certainty that something was terribly wrong. The rain came down in sheets across Hollow Creek Cemetery, turning the October earth to mud beneath my polished Oxfords. Around me, black umbrellas bobbed like ravens' wings, mourners huddled against the downpour, while Father Joseph Brennan's voice carried over the sound of water drumming on stretched nylon. My daughter, Elena Robertson Castellano, 42 years old and the heart of our vineyard operations, lay in the casket before me after 2 years of mysterious illness that doctors called lupus. But something in the rain-soaked air told me there was more to her death than anyone had said. Mark Castellano, my 48-year-old son-in-law, in an impeccable charcoal Armani suit, stood beside me at the grave. His hand finding my shoulder for the 4th time that morning, each touch making my skin crawl in ways I couldn't yet explain. He didn't pull away when I stiffened. His fingers just pressed harder, proprietary like he was claiming ownership of my grief. I wanted to shrug him off. Instead, I stood perfectly still, watching the casket descend into wet earth and felt nothing but wrongness. Not the hollow ache of loss. Not the piercing grief that had consumed me when my wife Catherine died 15 years ago. Just cold clinical observation, like I was back on the bench watching a defendant's attorney feed him lines. Something smelled wrong, like old secrets rotting through at last. Why did Mark's hand on my shoulder feel like a spider crawling across my skin? Why did every touch make me want to step away? I had known this man for 15 years. He had married my daughter, managed our family vineyard's finances, sat at our Christmas table. But standing here in the rain, his touch felt like a violation I couldn't name. Father Joseph Brennan, 65 years old, with liver-spotted hands that trembled as he led the funeral service, kept finding my eyes throughout the ceremony with a look that wasn't priestly comfort. It was guilt mixed with desperate urgency. His voice cracked when he spoke Elena's name. Elena Robertson Castellano lived with purpose, loved fiercely, and protected those she cherished until her final breath. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I couldn't decode. Protected until her final breath. Why did that sound like accusation rather than eulogy? Mark's phone buzzed in his jacket. Once, twice, 3 times. He checked it without apology, thumbs moving across the screen while the priest recited prayers for the dead. No tears on his face. No tremor in his jaw. Just cool efficiency like Elena's funeral was another board meeting he needed to manage. I had sentenced murderers who showed more emotion. The mourners began to disperse as the first shovelful of earth hit the casket with a wet thud that made my chest tighten. Father Brennan approached his vestments, soaked his hands shaking as he reached for mine, in what should have been a comforting gesture. But when our hands clasped, he stumbled an awkward lurch that brought him close enough for me to smell coffee and fear on his breath. "She only ever called you Maxwell when something mattered." He whispered, his lips barely moving as he pressed something small and folded into my vest pocket with practiced stealth. Then he was moving away, blessing another mourner, leaving me standing in the rain with a secret burning against my ribs. Mark's hand landed on my shoulder again. "We need to go. The lawyers are waiting." Lawyers. Not grief counselors, not family friends. Lawyers. I nodded slowly, buying time, my fingers brushing the hidden note in my pocket. "What's the urgency? Estate matters can't wait." Mark's voice was smooth, patient, the tone of a man explaining simple math to a child. Elena had assets, trusts, accounts that need immediate attention. Probate law is time-sensitive, Maxwell. You know that. I did know that. I had presided over enough estate disputes to understand the machinery of death and inheritance. But something in Mark's eagerness made my judicial instincts flare like warning sirens. Father Brennan's eyes found mine across Elena's casket one final time. Not priestly comfort, guilt, desperate drowning guilt. Then he turned away, his shoulders hunched against the rain, and I understood with sudden clarity that whatever was in my pocket had cost him something to give me. My phone vibrated, then again. Text messages lighting up the screen in rapid succession, all from Mark, even though he stood 3 feet away. Come home now. Lawyers won't wait. Don't talk to anyone from the church. They don't understand the legal situation. Maxwell, this is important. Trust me. Trust me. The words every liar uses when the truth is slipping away. I pulled the note from my pocket as mourners filed past their condolences washing over me like rain. The paper was damp, folded tight, covered in handwriting. I recognized Father Brennan's careful script, urgent and cramped. Maxwell, midnight tonight. Catherine's oak hawk carving, come alone. Elena buried something there. Her exact words, Dad will know what to do. I should have acted sooner, God forgive me. Trust no one else. J.B. Catherine's oak, the tree my wife had loved on the edge of our vineyard property, where I had carved a hawk into the trunk the summer before she died. A place only family would know. A place Elena had chosen deliberately. Dad will know what to do. My daughter's voice echoed in my memory, sharp and clear. Not Daddy the way she'd called me as a child. Not Father the formal address she used in company. Maxwell. The name she used when something mattered. The note in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. Truth on one side. Mark's demands on the other. My daughter's final message waiting under an oak tree at midnight. Mark was watching me, his eyes narrow, calculating. His phone was out again, typing another message, his jaw tight with frustration that he thought I couldn't see. I looked at Father Brennan's guilt-stricken face across the cemetery, then at Mark's perfectly controlled expression, then down at the fresh earth covering my daughter's casket. She had left me a message. She had chosen Father Brennan as messenger, knowing he would risk something to deliver it. She had invoked my dead wife's memory, our private place, our secret language. Elena had protected those she cherished until her final breath. Mark's text demanded I come home immediately to meet lawyers, warning me not to listen to anyone from the church. I looked at Father Brennan's guilt-stricken face, then at the note burning in my pocket. I had a choice to make, and I chose truth over obedience. I drove my old Ford F-150 away from the cemetery, ignoring the steady buzz of Mark's texts. In my rearview mirror, headlights Mark's Mercedes following me down the vineyard road. The defiance felt cold and clinical in my chest, like every decision I'd made from the bench when evidence contradicted a smooth narrative. Mark wanted me home. Mark wanted lawyers. Mark wanted control. But Father Brennan's note burned in my vest pocket with 3 impossible words, Dad will know what to do. My phone lit up again, then again. The buzzing became relentless. Dad, where are you going? Lawyers waiting. Come home. Now. I didn't answer. Just watched those headlights grow brighter in my mirror, Mark accelerating to close the gap between us. The rain hammered my windshield, turning the world into streaks of gray and black, but I knew these roads. 40 years of driving between vineyard rows, checking harvests, walking Catherine through sunset tours of our land. Mark had managed our finances for 15 years, but he didn't know the terrain the way I did. Another text vibrated across my phone screen. Change locks for security. I'll let you in. Don't listen to anyone from church. Change the locks. On my own house. The house Catherine and I had built together, where we'd raised our children, where I'd lived for 47 years. Mark had changed the locks and was offering to let me in like I was a guest requiring permission. 30 years on the bench taught me when someone's hiding something. Mark's desperate. Why? His headlights flashed behind me, high beams, then low, then high again. A signal, an order, pull over, stop, obey. I kept driving. The Mercedes horn blared long and aggressive, shattering the rain-muffled quiet. Once, twice, 3 times. My phone rang Mark's name, lighting up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately. He was losing patience. Good. Desperate people make mistakes. I turned right onto Vineyard Service Road 12, a narrow dirt path that wound between the oldest Cabernet vines on the property. The truck's tires churned mud headlights bouncing as I navigated ruts worn deep by decades of harvest equipment. Behind me, Mark's Mercedes hesitated at the turn, low-clearance, expensive paint job, city-slick tires not made for this terrain. But he followed anyway, his headlights lurching as the Mercedes scraped over uneven ground. I drove another quarter mile, then made my move. Engine off, lights off, complete darkness. I coasted the F-150 between two rows of vines and stopped my heart hammering against my ribs like it hadn't in 30 years. Silence. Rain drumming on the truck roof, my own breathing loud in the darkness. Mark's headlights swept across the vines, missing me by 15 feet. I held my breath, waited. 30 years sentencing criminals taught me patience. Patience wins. The Mercedes crept forward, engine growling, headlights cutting through rain and darkness like searchlights hunting prey. I sat perfectly still, my 72-year-old joints screaming from tension, mud splattered across my windshield, obscuring me from view. Mark's car passed, kept going. The red taillights disappeared around a bend engine, fading into the distance. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15, rain pounding overhead, my breath fogging the windows, phone vibrating with increasingly frantic messages I refused to read. At 30 minutes, the vineyard road ahead remained dark and empty. Mark was gone. I started the engine and drove the opposite direction, circling back through service roads toward the isolated corner of the property where Catherine's oak stood. The ancient tree, 150 years old and thick as a small house, marked the boundary between our vineyard and open hills. My wife, Catherine Robertson, who had passed away 15 years earlier, at 65, after a full life of painting vineyard sunsets and nurturing our children, had planted nothing but she'd loved that oak as a young bride, had carved a hawk into its trunk with her own hands, saying it would watch over our family forever. Now our daughter had buried secrets beneath it. I parked 100 yards away and walked the rest rain, soaking through my funeral suit, mud sucking at my polished Oxfords with every step. My flashlight beam found the massive trunk water streaming down ancient bark, and there, 8 feet up, Catherine's hawk wings spread still sharp after 40 years. She'd carved that the summer before Elena was born, said our family needed a guardian. Catherine had planted this oak 60 years ago, as a young bride. She'd carved that hawk with her own hands. Now, our daughter had buried secrets beneath it. The symmetry felt deliberate, intentional. Like Elena knew I'd remember everything Catherine meant to this place. I pulled the folding shovel from my truck bed and began to dig. The earth was soft from rain, but heavy, each shovelful a fight against mud that clung and pulled. My hands blistered, my back screamed. 72 years old, soaked to the bone, digging a grave-sized hole at midnight, while my son-in-law hunted me through the dark. This wasn't how I'd imagined my daughter's funeral day ending. 1 foot down, 2 feet, 3. The shovel hit something solid with a metallic clunk that sent vibrations up my arms. I dropped to my knees in the mud hands, scrabbling flashlight clenched between my teeth. Copper gleamed in the beam, a lockbox maybe 12 inches square, wrapped in waterproof tarp and sealed with duct tape. I hauled it up heavy and cold and brushed mud from its surface. A combination lock hung from the latch. 4 digits. Worn brass that had been handled recently, fingerprints still visible in the grime. What truth was so dangerous that Elena couldn't tell me while she was alive? What had she discovered that required this midnight excavation, this cryptic trail of breadcrumbs from beyond the grave? My hands shook as I turned the combination lock dial, rain-washing mud from my fingers. 0, 4, 2, 8. Elena's birthday. April 28th. She knew I'd remember. She knew I'd come. The lock clicked open. I sat in the cold mud under Catherine's oak tree rain, soaking through my suit, and opened the wax-sealed envelope with shaking hands. My daughter's handwriting blurred through rain and tears. I didn't remember starting to cry. The green ribbon she'd tied around the letter fell loose in my fingers, the same ribbon Catherine had worn in her hair on our wedding day, the one Elena had kept in her jewelry box for 40 years. She'd chosen it deliberately, a message within the Message family legacy love. I unfolded the pages Elena's careful script, filling both sides in the blue ink she always used for important documents. My flashlight beam wavered as I began to read. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And he's responsible for my passing. Mark has been poisoning me with arsenic in my Earl Grey tea for 2 years. The words hit like physical blows. Arsenic, poison, 2 years. My hands stopped shaking and went perfectly still, the way they always did in court, when a witness revealed something that changed everything. I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking. Elena was sick, the doctor said lupus. She's confused. But Dad, I'm not confused. I had my blood tested privately 3 times. The reports are in the lockbox. Arsenic levels climbing steadily 8.4 parts per million in March, 15.6 in June, 21.3 in August. By the time you read this, I expect it will be over 25 parts per million. Fatal range. Arsenic. The word screamed from the page. 27.8 parts per million. Fatal. My daughter hadn't been sick. She'd been murdered. My breath came in short gasps that fogged the air. The rain pounded harder, turning the ground beneath me to soup. But I couldn't move. Could only read. He killed David too. 10 years ago. The brake line wasn't an accident. I found proof photographs of the cut line that the insurance company took, but never investigated. Mark was having an affair with someone who worked at the auto shop. She helped him cover it up. Dad, our son, was murdered, and I let you believe it was an accident for 10 years, because I was afraid. David. My son, David Maxwell Robertson, had been 30 years old, a talented civil engineer with my same jaw and his mother Catherine's kind eyes, when his truck went off Highway 29 10 years ago in what police called brake failure. But Elena's evidence now proved Mark had cut the brake line and murdered him. I was afraid if I told you Mark would hurt you next. You were grieving so hard after David died. I couldn't risk losing you too, so I investigated quietly. Hired a private investigator named Jim Brennan 7 months ago. We found everything, Dad. The poison purchases disguised as vineyard pest control. The embezzled money, $1.8 million over 5 years. The forged will he planned to use after I died. All of it. $1.8 million. My family's vineyard generations of work bled dry while Mark smiled at Sunday dinners and called me Dad. I wanted to tell you so many times, but Mark watches you. He's always watching. Checking your pills, your food, making sure you're alone when he visits. I think he was planning to kill you next, after he got control of the estate through my death. The page shook in my hands, not from fear, from rage so cold and precise it felt like ice forming in my veins. Don't confront him alone. Please, Dad, I know you. I know 30 years on the bench taught you justice, fairness, the law. But Mark is dangerous. He's killed twice that we know of. Build the case first. Evidence. Witnesses. Make it airtight so he can't slip through, then strike. I sat in the cold rain, holding proof my son's death wasn't an accident. 10 years of believing it was brake failure. 10 years of grief thinking it was random tragedy. All lies. Mark had murdered David, and I'd invited him into our family, let him marry Elena never suspecting. Jim Brennan is a good man, former FBI specialized in financial crimes and homicide. He knows everything I discovered. When you're ready, call him. He's been waiting. I paid him for a full year of work. He'll help you finish this. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to stop him before he did this to me. But I'm giving you the tools now. Everything you need. Don't let him hurt anyone else. Don't let him get away with killing your children. Finish what I started. Your daughter always, Elena. The letter ended there, but my hands were already reaching for the other contents of the lockbox. 3 toxicology reports in plastic sleeves, each one a death sentence written in medical terminology. March 2025, 8.4 parts per million arsenic. June 2025, 15.6 parts per million. September 2025, 27.8 parts per million. Fatal. Photographs next. David's truck, the brake line cut clean through, not frayed, not worn, but severed with precision. Insurance photos marked "case closed" in red stamp. Another photo of Mark meeting a woman outside an auto shop, their body language intimate conspiratorial. Bank records showing wire transfers. Small amounts at first, then larger. $500, $2,000, $10,000. All routed through shell companies with names like Castellano Consulting LC, and Robertson Estate Management Group. Companies I'd never authorized, never signed for, but bore my forged signature on incorporation papers. A flash drive in a small plastic case. A business card. Jim Brennan, private investigator, former FBI. Handwritten on the back. When you're ready, call me, day or night. I've been waiting. How long had Mark been planning this? Had he targeted David first? Or was it opportunistic? Did he marry Elena, knowing he'd eventually kill her too? How does a man smile at Sunday dinners while plotting to poison his wife? I spread everything out in the mud, cataloging it the way I'd examined evidence in chambers for 3 decades. Exhibit A toxicology proving systematic poisoning. Exhibit B photographs proving David's murder. Exhibit C financial records proving embezzlement and motive. Exhibit D forged documents proving premeditation. Mark Castellano had murdered both my children, had stolen nearly $2 million from my family, had planned to forge my daughter's will and possibly kill me next to secure the entire estate. And Elena, brave, brilliant Elena, had investigated it all while dying, had documented every crime, every transaction, every piece of proof, had protected me even as the poison consumed her, knowing I would find this lockbox, knowing I would do what she couldn't. Finish what I started. The rain fell harder, washing mud from the documents, but I didn't care. I sat under Catherine's oak tree for another hour, methodically reviewing everything, committing details to memory the way I'd memorized case law and precedent. The arsenic levels, the bank account numbers, the dates of David's brake inspection versus his death, the shell company names. Mark Castellano had murdered both my children and stolen from my family for years. And Elena, brave, brilliant Elena, had documented everything, knowing she was dying, protecting me even as the poison consumed her. The rain fell harder. I had work to do. I drove to a cheap motel off Highway 29 and bought a burner phone from the 24-hour gas station next door. At exactly 3 a.m., still wearing my mud-caked funeral suit, I dialed the number on Jim Brennan's card. The phone rang once. Jim Brennan answered before the second ring. "Judge Robertson, I've been waiting for your call." No surprise in his voice, no confusion at the hour. Just calm certainty, like he'd been sitting by his phone for months knowing this moment would come. "Elena told me 7 months ago," he continued before I could speak. "If something happened to her, you'd find the lockbox. She said you'd call when you were ready. She knew you, Judge, knew exactly how you'd react." My throat tightened. She was right. I found everything. The letter, the toxicology reports, evidence Mark murdered both my children. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know we need to meet. Tonight. I'm 45 minutes away." Jim's voice was steady, professional, but underneath I heard something else. Respect. Maybe even affection. "Don't go home. Don't contact Mark. I'll explain everything when I get there." I gave him the motel address and sat on the water-stained bed, Elena's evidence spread around me like pieces of a case I'd been assigned to prosecute. Except, this wasn't some stranger's crime. This was my family, my children, my life dismantled and revealed as a decades-long deception. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes, an industrial cleaner. The air conditioner rattled in the window, struggling against October cold. I poured burnt gas station coffee into a styrofoam cup and waited, my hands still trembling slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. Jim's voice had been steady, professional, but I'd heard something else underneath respect for Elena. She was brilliant, Judge, methodical. She documented everything knowing she was dying, protecting you from making mistakes driven by grief. She loved you that much. The words echoed in the cheap room. Elena had orchestrated all of this, the lockbox, the PI, the evidence trail, knowing I would follow it exactly as she'd planned. Even dying poisoned slowly over 2 years, she'd been protecting me, making sure I had the tools to finish what she'd started without getting myself killed in the process. Headlights swept across the thin curtains at 4:30 a.m. Gravel crunched in the parking lot. A firm knock, professional and controlled. Jim Brennan, a 52-year-old former FBI agent with steel gray hair and the kind of weathered face that had seen too many crime scenes, stood in the doorway with a leather messenger bag and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades interviewing killers. He shook my hand, firm grip, callous the handshake of someone who meant what they said. "Judge Robertson, I'm sorry for your loss. Both of them." He stepped inside, closed the door, and began spreading additional files across the bed beside Elena's evidence. "And I'm sorry Elena had to carry this burden alone for so long." "Show me what you have." Jim pulled out surveillance photographs. Mark Castellano meeting a man at a diner, their heads close together, conspiratorial. The same man at an auto shop, motor oil, staining his work shirt. More photos spanning years, different locations, same 2 men, same secretive body language. "This is Victor Reyes, 50 years old, ex-convict mechanic. Mark's been meeting with him for years." Jim tapped the photos, his expression grim. "I believe he's the one who cut David's brake line 10 years ago, on Mark's orders." The room tilted slightly. Not just Mark. Mark had hired someone, had outsourced the murder of my son to a professional with a criminal record and mechanical expertise. This wasn't passion or impulse. This was calculated, cold-blooded planning. Can you prove it? Not yet. But Victor's vulnerable. 3 parole violations I know about. Financial trouble, child support debt. He's the weak link, Judge. We pressure him, offer immunity in exchange for testimony. He'll roll on Mark. I stared at Victor Reyes's face in the grainy photos. This man had killed David, had taken payment to cut a brake line and send my son off a cliff. And Mark had hired him, paid him, probably congratulated himself on the clean execution. My hands clenched into fists. Jim's phone buzzed. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Maggie, I'm with Judge Robertson now." A woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Judge Robertson, I'm Maggie Stone, forensic accountant. I'm sorry for your loss." Elena was a remarkable woman. Her financial documentation was meticulous. She made my job much easier. Maggie Stone, a 45-year-old forensic accountant with 20 years of experience dismantling corporate fraud, spoke with the confidence of someone who'd traced money through dozens of shell companies and always found her target. "How long to trace the embezzlement?" I asked. 48 hours. Elena gave me the account numbers, shell company names, transfer dates. I just need to connect the dots and get bank statements through proper channels. When I'm done, we'll have a complete financial trail proving Mark stole $1.8 million over 5 years. Financial motive plus murder means we can bury him legally. Could I wait? Could I see Mark at family dinners, smile and nod, knowing he'd murdered my children? Could I perform normalcy while building a case that would take weeks, maybe months? The rage in my chest was a physical thing, hot and sharp, demanding immediate action. I wanted to drive to Mark's house right now, put my hands around his throat, watch the light leave his eyes the way it had left Elena's, the way it had left David's. But 30 years on the bench had taught me patience, had taught me that rushed cases collapsed, that guilty men walked free because prosecutors got sloppy, emotional, impatient. Jim must have seen something in my face. "You're a judge," he said quietly. "You know better than anyone. We build the case first. We make it airtight. Then we strike, and when we do, Mark doesn't walk away. Ever." He was right. I hated that he was right, but he was. "What's the plan?" Jim pulled out a legal pad, began sketching timeline. Phase 1. Maggie traces the money, we get financial motive documented. Phase 2. I arrange a meeting with Victor Reyes, offer him immunity, get his confession on record about David's brake line. Phase 3. We take toxicology to the DA, get exhumation order, if needed, prove arsenic poisoning. Phase 4. We coordinate everything, financial evidence, murder, confessions, public exposure, and drop it all at once so Mark can't run or destroy evidence. How long? 2 weeks? Maybe 3 if Victor's hard to crack. The answer was simple. I'd spent 30 years on the bench. 30 years watching guilty men walk free because prosecutors rushed, got sloppy, missed details. Mark wouldn't walk. Not this time. Not ever. I looked at the evidence spread across the bed, at Jim's weathered face, at Maggie's number, glowing on the phone screen, at the plan taking shape from Elena's careful preparation and my 3 decades of judicial experience. As dawn broke over the Napa Valley Hills outside Motel 7, casting orange light through thin curtains, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it was hardening into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. My entire career had been about building cases that couldn't be broken. Mark had murdered my children. Now I would show him what happens when you make an enemy of a judge who knows exactly how the system works. At 6 a.m., I sent Mark a single text, "Coming home now." Then I drove away from Motel 7 with Jim's strategy fresh in my mind, and Elena's evidence locked in the truck's toolbox. I parked in my own driveway at 6:47 a.m. and saw Mark's Mercedes already there, a second car beside it, gunmetal gray attorney plates. He'd brought reinforcements to my own house. On the morning after my daughter's funeral, I sat in the truck for 30 seconds, forcing my breathing to steady my face, to relax into the mask of a grieving father. Jim's words echoed, "Build the case. Don't confront. Make it airtight." I'd spent the night cataloging evidence of my children's murders, and now I had to walk into my own home and pretend I knew nothing. Mark opened the front door before I reached it. Concern painted across his face like stage makeup. "Dad, thank God." I was so worried. Where were you? I needed to be alone. I kept my voice flat, exhausted, not hard to fake after no sleep and hours in the rain. Drove around. Couldn't face coming back here yet. I understand. Mark's hand found my shoulder, that familiar proprietary touch that now made my skin crawl with knowledge. But there's something urgent we need to discuss. I brought Gerald Hastings to help. Gerald Hastings, 58 years old, senior partner at Hastings & Lowe, with silver temples and a reputation for ruthless estate law, stood in my living room holding a leather folio embossed with his firm's gold seal. He extended a hand-firm grip, expensive watch. The handshake of someone billing $500 an hour. Judge Robertson, my condolences. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. What's this about? I moved past them both, heading for the kitchen, establishing that this was still my house, despite the ambush. I started brewing coffee with hands I kept deliberately steady. Mark exchanged a glance with Gerald, quick, coordinated, rehearsed. Dad, we're worried about you. Disappearing all night after the funeral, not answering calls. Gerald thinks we need to discuss some legal protections for the estate. Legal protections? The phrase landed like a judge's gavel. Gerald opened his folio on the kitchen table. Judge Robertson, I'll be direct. The Robertson Vineyard is held in a family trust established by your late wife, Catherine, in 1994. You serve as trustee. Elena's death makes Mark the primary beneficiary through spousal inheritance under California law. However, he emphasized the word carefully. The trust documents require trustee approval for any liquidation or major financial decisions. That's you, Maxwell. Mark cannot access Elena's inheritance without your signature. I understood immediately. The trust structure Catherine had created to protect our children now protected me and trapped Mark. He'd murdered Elena, expecting automatic inheritance. Instead, California's trust law meant he needed my cooperation. No wonder he was desperate to have me declared incompetent. The vineyard also has a construction loan of $4.5 million due in 90 days, Gerald continued. Elena was managing the payments. With her passing, Mark discovered some concerning gaps in the financial records. What kind of gaps? Gerald slid papers across the table. Missing invoices, unclear fund transfers. The bank is demanding full documentation within 10 days, or they'll call the loan. With your recent... He paused delicately. Erratic behavior at the funeral and your disappearance last night. Mark is concerned about your capacity to handle both the trustee duties and the estate's complex financial situation. Gerald slid the conservatorship petition across the coffee table. My name was already typed as respondent incompetent. The words sat there on official letterhead, black ink on white paper. Maxwell Theron Robertson incompetent. 3 decades on the Superior Court bench, and my son-in-law was petitioning to have me declared mentally unfit. He's already moving. Elena was right. Mark needs legal control before I discover the embezzlement. This is temporary, Mark said, quickly reading something in my face. Just until we stabilize the loan situation. Gerald can manage the financial paperwork while you grieve. You shouldn't have to deal with banks and lawyers right now, Dad. The endearment was poison in his mouth. This man had murdered my children, and he was calling me Dad while trying to steal legal control of my estate. I lifted the petition, scanning pages with the trained eye of someone who'd reviewed thousands of legal documents. Conservatorship of person and estate. Mark Castellano named as conservator. Full financial authority. The hearing scheduled in 10 days. For a moment I saw Elena's face in the rain, her funeral dress dark as the soil. I blinked, focused. She'd given me the tools, now I had to use them. I set down the petition and met Gerald's eyes with the calm I'd perfected in chambers. Gerald, I've presided over 100 conservatorships in my career. You're asking me to sign away my legal capacity based on what grief A need for privacy after burying my daughter. Judge Robertson, no one's questioning your legal acumen. Gerald's voice was smooth, reasonable. But the bank deadline is real. Mark has been managing day-to-day operations for 15 years. This simply formalizes, give me 48 hours to review these documents with my own counsel. Mark's expression flickered, frustration quickly masked. Dad, the bank. 48 hours, Mark. I let steel enter my voice, the tone I'd used to silence attorneys who pushed too hard in my courtroom. Unless you think a superior court judge can't read his own conservatorship petition. Gerald raised a diplomatic hand. 48 hours is reasonable. We'll schedule a follow-up meeting. But Judge, I need your word. You'll engage with this in good faith. The estate's financial situation is genuinely precarious. I have never acted in bad faith in my life. I held his gaze until he looked away. You'll have my answer in 48 hours. Jim had said Maggie needed 48 hours to trace the embezzlement. I was giving Mark exactly what he wanted later, when the financial evidence would be irrefutable, when every dollar stolen would be documented and ready for prosecution. Mark and Gerald gathered their papers, satisfied they'd delivered their blow. Gerald handed me a business card, my direct line. Call anytime, Judge. After they left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching Mark's Mercedes pull away Gerald's sedan following. They thought they'd cornered me, thought grief and legal pressure would force compliance. They had no idea I'd spent the night with a former FBI agent and a forensic accountant planning their destruction. My phone buzzed. Text from Maggie Stone. Found the embezzlement trail 1.8 million, moved through 3 shell companies. Also found something bigger. I stared at those last 3 words. Something bigger. Bigger than poisoning Elena with arsenic for 2 years. Bigger than hiring Victor Reyes to cut David's brake line. Bigger than 1.8 million in stolen money. How many other families had Mark destroyed? How many deaths had I missed while I sat on the bench blind to the killer at my own table? I dialed Jim immediately. He answered on the first ring. Jim, I just got a text from Maggie. She found the embezzlement, but she says there's something bigger. What did she find? A pause, then Jim's voice, grim. Jennifer Morrison, Mark's first wife. She died 12 years ago. Life insurance paid out $800,000. The coroner ruled it suicide. Suicide. But you don't think it was. Elena didn't think it was. That's why she hired me. Jim's voice was quiet. Judge Mark's been doing this for a long time. Elena was number 3. We think Jennifer was number 1. The kitchen spun slightly. 3 wives, 3 deaths. A pattern spanning more than a decade. Maggie's text glowed on my screen. Found the embezzlement trail, 1.8 million, moved through 3 shell companies. Also found something bigger. Bigger than murder. Serial murder. Task 2.3. The drive to Sacramento took 90 minutes through gathering darkness. Jim drove while I sat silent, preparing to face the man who had murdered my son. Victor Reyes opened his trailer door with a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, then froze when he saw my face. Victor Reyes, 41 years old, ex-military mechanic turned small-time criminal, lived in a rusted Airstream with engine parts scattered in the dirt yard like grave markers. But it was his expression that stopped me. Cold instant recognition, followed by drowning guilt. Jesus Christ. His voice cracked beer can, slipping from his fingers to splash across the metal threshold. You're David's father. I saw your picture at... He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. I'd seen that look before in courtrooms on the faces of defendants when evidence they thought buried came to light. Jim stepped forward, FBI credentials already out. Victor Reyes. We need to talk about October 2015, David Robertson's brake line, and what Mark Castellano paid you to cut it. Victor's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on the trailer's metal steps, cigarette dropping into the dirt. I'm sorry, God. I'm so goddamn sorry. I didn't know. I knew, but I didn't. His hands shook. You're really his father. I was. I kept my voice level judicial, the tone that had sentenced men to decades behind bars. My son was 30 years old. He had a fiancée. He wanted to design sustainable buildings. And you took $50,000 to murder him. Victor's face crumpled. He told me it was just sabotage, insurance fraud. Said his stepson was a problem, needed to be scared, straight not killed. I swear I didn't know he meant. Jim cut in. We have witnesses placing you with Mark Castellano 3 days before David's accident. We have bank records showing a $50,000 cash withdrawal. Either you talk to us now, or we take this to the DA and you face first-degree murder charges. Your choice. The threat worked. Victor stumbled inside, pulled a shoebox from under his bed, and produced a digital recorder. I recorded everything he said quietly, every meeting. After David died, and I saw the news saw his picture, his family, I knew Mark had lied. I kept the recordings. Insurance, I guess. Proof I was just a tool. He pressed play. Mark's voice filled the cramped trailer, calm and precise. The brake line. Make it look like wear and tear. My stepson drives Highway 29, daily plenty of curves, steep drops. 50,000 cash, no contact after. Can you do it? I listened to my son's death sentence delivered in Mark's calm baritone, the same voice that had called me dad for 14 years. Victor's voice on the recording, younger, hesitant. And if something goes wrong, if he survives, Mark's reply, cold. Then you didn't do it right. I'm paying for a solution. Victor, permanent. The recording clicked off. I sat in silence, hands clenched so tight my knuckles went white. Jim put a hand on my shoulder, steadying professional. When I managed, October 8th, 2015, 3 days before David died. Victor wiped his eyes. I cut the line at his apartment complex. Clean cut, precise. Made it look like road wear would finish the job on the first steep curve. Highway 29, mile marker 37. That's where he went off. Mile marker 37. I'd driven past that curve 1,000 times, never knowing it was David's execution site. There's more, Victor said quietly. 2 weeks ago, Mark called again. Wanted me to do the same thing to an old Ford F-15. Oh, your truck judge. You were supposed to be next. The trailer tilted. Jim's hand tightened on my shoulder. I refused, Victor continued quickly. Told him I was out. That's when he got scary, said people who knew too much had accidents. Said if I talked to anyone, he'd make sure I went down for David's murder alone. I've been scared for 2 weeks waiting for cops or worse. You're talking now, Jim said. That's smart. You testify against Mark D.A. might consider immunity. Victor nodded, desperate. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Just keep him away from me. We left Sacramento with Victor's confession recorded, his promise to appear before a grand jury, and the weight of knowing Mark had planned my death the same way he'd executed David's. Jim's phone rang as we hit Highway 80. Maggie's name lit the screen. Talk to me, Jim said, putting it on speaker. Sam Whitmore just bought a one-way ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica. Maggie's voice was urgent. Departs SFO at midnight. If we lose him, we lose our poisoning witness. Jim checked his watch. 11:15. We're 40 minutes from SFO. Call ahead, have security detain him. We made it in 35 minutes, Jim's sedan, pushing 90 the whole way. Airport security had Sam Whitmore in a detention room. His carry-on bag opened, his face ashen with trapped animal fear. How many times had I sat across from Sam at Sunday dinners while he carried the secret of Elena's murder in his poisoned hands? Sam Whitmore, 53 years old, the Robertson Vineyards operations manager for 8 years, had the build of someone who worked outdoors and the eyes of someone who'd stopped sleeping well. He looked at me and started crying. Judge Robertson, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. What did Mark tell you to put in my daughter's tea? He said it was heart vitamins, organic supplement. She had a condition he said needed daily doses, but was stubborn about taking pills. He gave me a container of white powder, told me to add a 1/4 teaspoon to her afternoon Earl Grey, every day, for her health. Why did you believe him? I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. 26 months, Sam. You added poison to my daughter's tea for 26 months. You never questioned it. Sam's face crumpled. He knew about my gambling debts. $50,000 I owed to illegal bookies in Sacramento. They were threatening my family, my wife, my kids. Mark paid them off, just like that. Said it was a loan, said I'd work it off managing the vineyard. Then 2 months later, he asked me to add the powder to Elena's tea. Said it was for her heart condition, that she was too stubborn to take pills. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. He owned me, Judge. The bookies, the debt, he'd documented everything. If I refused, he'd turn me into the IRS for unreported gambling income. I'd lose my house, my family, everything. So I did what he asked and told myself it was medicine. For 26 months, Jim's voice was steel. Sam nodded miserably. I trusted him at first. He was family. But after 6 months, I started to suspect. Elena was getting sicker. I asked Mark if we should tell her doctor. He just smiled and said doctors already knew. Then he sent me a photo of me handing cash to the bookies. Said if I stopped or talked, he'd make sure I went down for murder alone. God, I killed her. I put poison in her tea for 2 years, and I was too afraid to stop. You knew enough to run, I said quietly. When did Mark tell you to disappear? Yesterday. Sam pulled out his phone, with shaking hands played a voice message. Mark's voice, the same cold precision I'd heard on Victor's recording. Sam, you've been useful, but things are getting complicated. Take the $200,000 I deposited this morning and disappear. Costa Rica, maybe Thailand, somewhere without extradition. Or refuse and stay. And accidents happen. Remember David. Mark's voice on the recording, remember David, my son's name, his trophy, his weapon. The detention room went silent. Sam's flight itinerary lay on the table between us, one-way non-refundable departing in 40 minutes. Blood money for 2 years of murder. Jim leaned forward. You testify against Mark Castellano for Elena's poisoning, and we'll talk to the DA about reduced charges. You run, and you're an accomplice to murder fleeing prosecution. Choose. Sam chose. 20 minutes later, we had his full confession on record, his agreement to testify, and the recording of Mark's threat saved to 3 different devices. We drove back through midnight fog, the Golden Gate Bridge disappearing behind us in mist. We had Victor. We had Sam. We had recordings of Mark ordering murder and witness intimidation. But one question haunted me as vineyards gave way to darkness. How many others had Mark killed before he ever met Elena? How many families had he destroyed in the years before? David before, Jennifer Morrison before anyone knew to look. Mark's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, and he didn't even know it yet. The answer to how many victims came at 7:42 a.m. the next morning when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Dr. Patricia Okafor's voice cut through the morning fog like a scalpel. Judge Robertson, someone murdered your daughter in plain sight, and her own doctor helped cover it up. Dr. Patricia Okafor, 52 years old, chief medical examiner for Napa County, had autopsied 300 suspicious deaths in her career. Elena Robertson Castellanos' case made her furious enough to call a judge at dawn. I sat up in the motel bed, sleep vanishing. What did you find? I reviewed your daughter's medical files last night. Dr. Okafor's controlled fury was palpable through the line. Hair loss, joint, pain, neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress, textbook, arsenic poisoning. Any competent physician should have ordered toxicology within the first 6 months. Dr. Richard Ashford waited 18 months, and when he finally ran the panel, it showed 18.7 parts per million arsenic. 18.7. Elena's private tests had shown climbing levels 8.4, 15.6, 21.3. But 18 months ago, her own doctor had already found proof she was being poisoned. What happened to the results? They disappeared from her file. Dr. Okafor's voice was ice. The lab has a copy in their archives, that's how I found it. But Elena's official medical record shows no toxicology panel was ever ordered. Someone deleted it from the system and removed the hard copy from her chart. Dr. Ashford, I can't prove that yet, but Judge Robertson, your daughter, was showing lethal arsenic levels 18 months before her death. If that test had been properly documented and acted upon, she'd be alive today. 18.7 parts per million. Lethal range begins at 10. Elena had been dying for 18 months, and her doctor had known. I called Jim immediately. Within 2 hours, Maggie had traced a $200,000 payment from one of Mark's shell companies to an offshore account linked to Dr. Richard Ashford. The payment was dated 3 days after the toxicology results came back. Blood money, payment for silence while my daughter died. Dr. Richard Ashford, 61 years old, had been the Robertson family physician for 23 years, delivering both Elena and David. His office walls covered with photos of grateful patients whose trust he'd betrayed. When we arrived at his office that evening, he was locking up for the day, medical bag in hand, looking every bit the respectable small-town doctor. Until he saw my face. Judge Robertson, his voice faltered. I heard about Elena. I'm so sorry. We need to talk about the toxicology panel you ordered 18 months ago. I kept my voice level, judicial, the one showing 18.7 parts per million arsenic, the one that disappeared from her medical file. Ashford's face went gray. He looked at Jim at the federal credentials, then back at me. His shoulders sagged. Inside, his office smelled of antiseptic and old paper diplomas covering one wall, family photos covering another. A good man's life built on decades of service, now about to crumble. Jim laid out the evidence methodically, the archived lab results, the deleted records, the $200,000 payment. Ashford sat behind his mahogany desk, hands trembling, saying nothing. How many times had I shaken Richard Ashford's hand at hospital fundraisers while he carried the secret of my daughter's murder in his prescription pad? Why, I finally asked. 23 years. Richard, you delivered my children. Why would you help Mark kill Elena? Ashford's face crumpled. I didn't know it was Mark. Not at first. I just knew the results were concerning. I called Elena privately, told her we needed to discuss the findings. That's when Mark contacted me. How? He knew about my prescription irregularities. Ashford's voice was barely a whisper. Minor things, writing scripts for friends without proper documentation, samples given to patients who couldn't afford medication. Nothing that harmed anyone but enough to lose my license if reported properly. Mark had evidence. Photos, records. He said if I reported the arsenic levels or kept the results on file, he'd destroy my career. 30 years of practice gone. So, you chose your career over my daughter's life. I thought God help me. I thought maybe it was environmental exposure, vineyard pesticides, that if Mark was involved, he'd stop once he knew we'd found it. Ashford was crying now, tears streaming down his weathered face. I deleted the results and told Elena the test came back normal. I told myself I was protecting the family, avoiding scandal. But I knew, deep down, I knew what I was doing. Jim leaned forward. Did Mark ever explicitly tell you he was poisoning Elena? No. But 3 months after I deleted the results, he sent another payment. Then another 6 months later, each time with a note, "For your discretion regarding the Robertson matter." I knew what it meant. I took the money and stayed quiet while your daughter died. The room went silent except for Ashford's ragged breathing. I watched his tears and felt nothing. Elena had cried too in her final months. No one had saved her. "You're going to testify," I said quietly. "You're going to stand in front of a jury and tell them exactly what Mark Castellano made you do. Every payment, every deleted record, every time you looked my daughter in the eye and lied about her test results." Ashford nodded, broken. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. It's the only thing left I can do for her." Jim pulled out a recording device. "Then start now. From the beginning. When did Mark first contact you and what exactly did he say?" For the next 90 minutes, Dr. Richard Ashford confessed to medical malpractice conspiracy to commit murder and accepting bribes to conceal evidence of poisoning. His voice never stopped shaking. His tears never stopped falling. But he talked, gave us everything. Dates, amounts, conversations, the exact method Mark used to leverage his prescription fraud into murder complicity. Another witness secured, another piece of Mark's empire cracking. As we left Ashford's office, the night air cold and sharp, Jim's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and his expression went grim. "Maxwell, you need to see this." Maggie's text glowed in the darkness, cross-referenced Mark's financials with death records. Found his first wife, Jennifer Morrison, died, 2013, $800,000, life insurance. Exhumation warrant approved. Digging starts tomorrow. Jennifer Morrison, Mark's first wife. Dead 12 years, $800,000 in life insurance. And now, an exhumation warrant. Mark had done this before, long before Elena, long before David. He'd been killing for over a decade, perfecting his methods, leaving bodies behind while collecting insurance money and moving on to the next target. "How many?" I asked, quietly staring at the text. Jim's face was shadowed in the dim light. "We're about to find out." The morning after learning about Jennifer Morrison's exhumation, Dr. Ashford called again. His voice was shaking worse than before. Dr. Ashford's whisper hit me like a physical blow. "The vitamin pills I prescribed you 6 months ago? Mark brought them. I never tested them. God help me, I never tested them." I sat down, hard phone pressed to my ear. "What pills?" "The daily supplements for elderly health," Mark said. "He brought them in a manufacturer's bottle, told me you needed preventative cardiac support. I wrote the prescription without question." "You've been taking them, haven't you? Every morning, with breakfast, for 6 months. Mark had suggested it himself, said I needed to stay sharp, stay healthy. I'd trusted him." Jim was already pulling on his jacket. "Hospital, now. We need blood work immediately." Dr. Patricia Okafor met us in the emergency room, her expression grim. She drew blood herself, rushed it to the lab with orders for comprehensive toxicology. Then she took the pill bottle from my trembling hands and disappeared into the hospital's analysis wing. 2 hours later, she returned with a lab report and a face carved from stone. "Your blood arsenic is 6.8 parts per million. You're not dying yet, Maxwell, but another 6 to 12 months of daily dosing and you would have been. 6.8 parts per million. The pills in my medicine cabinet. The same breakfast routine Mark had encouraged. I'd been drinking my own death for half a year. The pills are 30% arsenic trioxide." Dr. Okafor continued setting down the lab analysis. Pharmaceutical grade, carefully formulated to dissolve slowly. Whoever made these knew exactly what they were doing. Low enough dose to avoid immediate symptoms, high enough to be fatal within a year. The same method used on Elena, just stretched over a longer timeline. How long? My voice sounded distant, clinical. How long before symptoms would have appeared? You're already showing early signs. The joint pain you mentioned last month, the occasional nausea, early arsenic toxicity. Another 2 months, and you'd have hair loss, neuropathy, confusion. 6 months, and you'd be bedridden like Elena was. 12 months. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Jim was already on his phone. "Maggie. I need Robertson estate security footage. All cameras last 6 months. Focus on Maxwell's bathroom and kitchen. Send it to my office immediately." We drove to Jim's office in silence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mark had watched me take those pills. Had probably smiled each morning, knowing I was one step closer to the same death he'd given Elena. How many mornings had Mark sat across from me, coffee in hand, watching me swallow the poison he'd planted, counting down the months until my funeral. The security footage loaded on Jim's computer. October 15th, 4 a.m. The timestamp glowed in the corner as Mark's figure entered my bathroom, a small flashlight in hand. He moved with practiced efficiency, opened the medicine cabinet, removed the vitamin bottle Dr. Ashford had prescribed, replaced it with an identical bottle from his jacket pocket. The switch took 30 seconds. Then, November 3rd, breakfast. I watched myself on screen sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and toast, taking the morning pill with orange juice. And there in the background, partially obscured by the doorway, Mark, watching. His face caught the morning light for just a moment, that slight smile. Jim froze the frame. Look, see that slight smile? He knew. I need to know, are you still with me after seeing that? If you're still here, please let me know. You're standing with me by dropping a comment below. Type the word loyalty if you believe a betrayal like this can never be forgiven. I'm reading every single one of your responses. Please be advised, the following part of this story contains some dramatized and fictionalized elements to better convey the emotional weight of these events. If you're not comfortable with that, feel free to stop the video right here. I watched the footage 3 more times. Mark entering my bathroom in darkness. Mark watching me take poison at breakfast. That satisfied expression on his face, like a man admiring his own work. I'd seen it 1,000 times. At Elena's wedding, at David's graduation, at Catherine's funeral. Always watching. Always pleased with himself. This changes everything Jim said quietly. We have visual documentation of attempted murder. Mark didn't just poison you, he recorded himself doing it. His own security system caught him committing premeditated attempted homicide. Why keep the cameras running? I asked. Why document his own crimes? Arrogance. Jim's voice was flat. He never thought anyone would look, never thought he'd get caught. And he enjoyed having proof of his own brilliance. Serial killers often do. We don't just have 3 murders now, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. We have 4 attempts, and the 4th victim is alive to testify. Jim's grim smile matched my own. That changes everything. A living victim who can describe the method, the symptoms, the progression. A retired superior court judge with credibility and presence. Mark tried to kill you, Maxwell, and now you get to tell a jury exactly how he did it. Dr. Okafor had already started chelation therapy to remove the arsenic from my system. She estimated 6 weeks of treatment, maybe 8. I'd be weak sick from the detox, but alive. Elena hadn't gotten that chance. My phone buzzed. Jim checked his, then looked up sharply. Maxwell, Rachel Morrison just sent her full statement. There's more. Jennifer had a sister who asked too many questions about the will after Jennifer's death. Questioned why Mark inherited everything when Jennifer's family trust should have protected her assets. She died in a hit and run 6 months later. The driver was never found. The room went cold. Jim froze the video on Mark's smile, that satisfied expression captured in morning light. Maxwell, we need to move fast. If Mark realizes we've discovered your poisoning, he might run. Or worse, accelerate his timeline with other targets. I looked at him sharply. What other targets? Jim's face was grim. We just got Rachel Morrison's statement. Jennifer had a sister who asked too many questions about the will. She died in a hit and run 6 months after Jennifer. Mark eliminates anyone who threatens him. How many? I asked quietly. We're about to find out. Jim was already dialing. Rachel Morrison is flying in tonight. She's been investigating her sister's death for 12 years, waiting for someone to finally listen. She has documentation, photos, timelines. Everything Mark thought he'd buried. I looked at the frozen image of Mark's smile on the screen, then at the pill bottle in the evidence bag on Jim's desk. My attempted murder, my testimony, my chance to speak for Elena, for David, for Jennifer, for every victim Mark had silenced. He'd made a mistake. He'd left me alive. Rachel Morrison's statement arrived by secure email at midnight, detailing 12 years of questions about her sister's death. But before I could finish readings, my phone rang. Emily Hartman's voice cracked with panic over the phone. Maxwell, Mark filed an emergency motion. The competency hearing, it's tomorrow morning. He's trying to declare you incompetent before the murder evidence can surface. Emily Hartman, 43 years old, a sharp estate litigation attorney who'd worked with me on probate cases for 15 years, had never sounded this rattled. Not in depositions, not in trials, not even when we'd lost a major inheritance dispute. But now her voice shook. How much time? 18 hours. The hearing is at 9 a.m. Gerald Hastings filed it an hour ago, citing your erratic behavior at Elena's funeral, your disappearance that night, and urgent mental health concerns. Maxwell, this is his Hail Mary. He knows we're building the murder case. Of course he knows. Mark had always been 3 steps ahead, reading people, calculating angles. He'd poisoned me for 6 months without anyone noticing. Now he was trying to have me declared incompetent before I could testify against him. Can we win? If you can prove mental fitness tomorrow morning, yes. Emily's voice steadied lawyer mode, engaging. But Maxwell, you'll have to sit in a courtroom and answer questions about your daughter's death, your son's death, and the fact that your son-in-law tried to poison you. You'll have to do that calmly, coherently, without breaking down. Can you do that? Could I prove I was sane while sitting in a courtroom where I had once sentenced a father who'd killed his family? Could any judge truly be objective about his own poisoning? I'll be there, I said, 9 a.m. sharp. We worked through the night in Emily's office. Medical records showing my clean bill of health before the poisoning. Cognitive tests from Dr. Okafor proving normal brain function. Character references from fellow judges, from vineyard employees, from community members who'd known me for decades. Every piece of evidence that Maxwell Theron Robertson, retired Superior Court judge, was sound of mind despite the trauma Mark had inflicted. Jim arrived at 3 a.m. with coffee and grim news. Mark's been calling his financial advisors all night, liquidating accounts, moving money offshore. He's preparing to run. After the hearing, if he loses, yes. If he wins and gets control of your estate, he'll consolidate everything and disappear with millions. Either way, we're running out of time. The Napa County Superior Court felt different walking in as a respondent instead of a judge. Courtroom 4, where I had presided over hundreds of cases, now held me as the subject of inquiry. The witness box, where I'd watched people sweat and lie and break, now I'd sit there being judged. Judge Helen Morrison, 67 years old, had served alongside me on the Superior Court bench for 18 years. She'd respected my rulings, consulted me on complex probate matters, attended Catherine's funeral. Now she had to determine if I was mentally competent or if my son-in-law's petition to control my life had merit. Mr. Robertson, please state today's date, the current president, and your understanding of why you're here today. I sat in the witness box where hundreds had sat before me, where I'd watched them sweat and lie and break. Now it was my turn. Now I was the one being judged. October 25th, 2025. Donald Trump is president. I'm here because my son-in-law, who murdered my daughter and son, is attempting to seize control of my estate by declaring me mentally incompetent. Gerald Hastings shot to his feet. Objection. The respondent's unfounded accusations. Judge Morrison's gavel silenced him. Mr. Hastings, this is a competency hearing, not a criminal trial. The respondent is entitled to state his understanding of the situation. She turned back to me. Mr. Robertson, please explain the legal elements of first-degree murder as you understand them. For the next 40 minutes, I answered questions with the precision I'd honed over 30 years on the bench. Recited case law. Explained the difference between competency and capacity. Discussed estate planning principles, tax implications, fiduciary duties. Every answer, calm, measured, professional. Gerald tried. He painted me as a grieving father, lost in conspiracy theories, someone who'd disappeared the night of his daughter's funeral, who'd been making wild accusations against his own family. But Emily countered with medical records, cognitive tests, testimony from Dr. Okafor about my clear mental state despite the arsenic poisoning that Mark had inflicted. Evidence we couldn't yet present in this hearing, but that hung in the air like smoke. Judge Morrison took 15 minutes to deliberate. When she returned, her expression was resolute. Petition dismissed. Mr. Robertson is clearly troubled by grief and recent traumatic discoveries. But troubled does not equal incompetent. He has demonstrated complete understanding of complex legal concepts, clear recollection of facts, and sound judgment in seeking counsel and pursuing appropriate legal remedies. Mr. Robertson remains in full control of his faculties and assets. The gavel came down with finality. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Emily squeezed my arm, relief flooding her face. We'd won. Mark's legal gambit had failed. But in the hallway, Mark's composure shattered. The crash of the chair against marble echoed like a gunshot. Mark's scream. "This isn't over!" Bailiffs swarmed. The mask was gone. Mark Castellano, the polished attorney in $1,000 suits, the man who'd maintained perfect control through 2 years of slowly poisoning his wife, stood in the courthouse hallway, throwing furniture like a cornered animal. His face contorted with rage spit flying as he screamed obscenities that echoed through halls where I'd once sentenced criminals. Bailiffs rushed in, 3 of them, restraining him as he fought. His expensive Italian shoes scrabbled against polished marble, his tailored jacket tearing as they forced his arms behind his back. "You think you won?" Mark's voice carried down the corridor, raw and vicious. "You think this is over, old man? I'll bury you. I'll bury all of you." Judge Morrison had already retreated to chambers, but courthouse staff and other attorneys stood frozen watching Mark Castellanos' complete breakdown. The respected estate attorney, the grieving widower, the concerned son-in-law, all of it revealed as performance. Underneath was this rage and desperation, and the absolute certainty that he deserved everything he'd stolen. Emily pulled me aside as bailiffs escorted Mark toward the exit, his shouting fading. "You won, Maxwell." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on Mark being led away, still struggling, still screaming threats. This wasn't victory. This was war, and I'd just forced him into a corner. Emily's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her face went pale. Jim just texted, "They're exhuming Jennifer Morrison's body tonight. If the toxicology matches Elena's, we file murder charges tomorrow." She looked up at me urgent, but Mark just made his desperation public. "We need to move fast." I watched Mark disappear down the courthouse steps, his rage still echoing in my ears. Tomorrow, we'd have proof, but tonight he'd know his empire was crumbling, and cornered killers were the most dangerous kind. The exhumation results came at 6 p.m. while I was still processing Mark's courthouse meltdown. Dr. Okafor's voice carried absolute certainty. 27.8 parts per million arsenic in Elena's remains. "Judge Robertson, this is definitive proof of murder. There is no question anymore." I sat down, hard phone pressed to my ear. 27.8. The fatal threshold was 10 parts per million. Elena had carried nearly 3 times the lethal dose in her body. "How long?" My voice was steady, judicial, even though my hands shook. "Based on tissue analysis, hair follicles, liver, kidney minimum, 24 months of systematic exposure." Dr. Okafor's clinical precision made it worse somehow. Every organ showing accumulation patterns consistent with daily low-dose poisoning over 2 years. This is aggravated first-degree murder, Maxwell. Premeditated, prolonged, torturous. 27.8 parts per million. Elena had carried nearly 3 times the lethal dose in her body for 2 years. 2 years of slow death. "I'm filing my report with DA Maria Gonzalez tonight," Dr. Okafor continued. "She'll have forensic proof by morning." Maria Gonzalez, 47 years old, senior deputy district attorney for Napa County, had prosecuted 73 homicides in her 22-year career, earning a 91% conviction rate and a reputation for taking down powerful defendants. When she called me 2 hours later, her voice was sharp with prosecutorial hunger. "Judge Robertson, I've reviewed the evidence package Jim Brennan compiled. Toxicology, proving poisoning confessions from 3 accomplices. Security footage showing attempted murder, financial records documenting motive and method." She paused. "This is the most documented murder case I've ever seen. We file formal charges in 48 hours. Jennifer Morrison," I said, his first wife. Same pattern. "Already subpoenaed her medical records from 2013. If her toxicology matches Elena's arsenic levels, we're looking at serial murder charges. Multiple victims, identical methods, 12-year pattern." Maria's satisfaction was audible. "Mark Castellano won't just face life in prison, Judge. He'll face death penalty consideration." The machinery of justice was finally turning. DA preparing charges, medical examiner filing reports, evidence cataloged and ready for grand jury presentation. But Jim had one more strategic move. "We need public pressure," he said, when I met him at his office the next morning. "Legal charges are crucial, but Mark has money connections, expensive lawyers. We need the court of public opinion on our side before he can spin this as a family dispute." "What are you suggesting?" "Journalist, someone with national reach and investigative credibility." Jim pulled out his phone, showed me a byline. "Diana Torres, San Francisco Chronicle. 2 Pulitzers for exposing corruption. She's built her career on taking down powerful people who thought they were untouchable." Diana Torres, 39 years old, 2-time Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, had exposed 3 political corruption scandals and 2 corporate fraud cases. Her byline synonymous with accountability. When she arrived at Jim's office, she carried a recorder, a notebook, and the focused intensity of someone who'd interviewed presidents and serial killers with equal professional detachment. "Judge Robertson, I need to hear it in your own words." She set the recorder on the table between us. Your daughter's murder, your son's murder, your own poisoning. America needs to understand what Mark Castellano is. For 6 hours I talked, told her everything. Elena's letter found in the rain, David's cut brake line, the pills I'd swallowed for 6 months, Mark's smile on security footage. Diana recorded it all, asked sharp questions, demanded specifics, never letting emotion cloud the facts. Then she interviewed everyone else. Victor Reyes confessing on camera to cutting David's brake line. Sam Whitmore describing 2 years of adding white powder to Elena's tea. Dr. Ashford breaking down about destroying toxicology results. Rachel Morrison talking about her sister, Jennifer's identical symptoms before death. I watched Diana interview Victor Reyes on camera, his confession recorded for the world to see. My son's killer crying on film. Elena would have wanted this, not just justice, but truth. Diana worked for 5 days straight, barely sleeping, synthesizing witness testimony and documentary evidence into a comprehensive narrative. Jim coordinated with Maria Gonzalez, ensuring the article's publication would coincide exactly with criminal charge, filing legal and public exposure hitting Mark simultaneously, giving him no time to control either narrative. On day 5, Diana called us to her office. It's done. She looked exhausted but fierce, her eyes red from screen time and determination. 20,000 words, 53 pieces of documentary evidence, 12 witness accounts. When this publishes, Mark Castellano's world ends. She turned her laptop screen toward me. The headline filled my vision in bold black letters. The Vineyard Tragedy. How Silicon Valley lawyer murdered 2 heirs for $15 million, wine empire. Below it, Elena's face smiled from a photograph taken at the vineyard 2 years before the poison began. She looked healthy, vibrant, alive, before Mark started killing her. The article detailed everything. David's brake line murder in 2015. Elena's systematic arsenic poisoning from 2023 to 2025. My own attempted murder. Jennifer Morrison's suspicious death in 2013. The $1.8 million embezzlement, the network of blackmailed accomplices, Mark's carefully constructed double life as respected attorney and serial family killer. How would Mark react when his face appeared in newspapers nationwide accused of serial family murder? Would he run? Would he fight? Would he finally break? We published the same morning. Maria files charges, Diana said. Legal and public exposure simultaneously. Criminal justice system and court of public opinion both closing in at once. She met my eyes. He'll have nowhere to hide, Judge Robertson. No spin, no lawyers managing optics, no time to liquidate assets or flee. One morning, he wakes up a free man. By noon, he's a nationally known accused serial killer facing murder charges. I nodded, unable to speak. Justice was coming, finally. Diana began finalizing the article, coordinating with her editors, preparing the documentation package that would accompany publication. Maria Gonzalez was drafting formal charges, scheduling grand jury presentation, building the prosecutorial framework that would put Mark in prison for the rest of his life. Then Maria's call shattered everything. Maxwell, we have a problem. Her voice was urgent, sharp. Mark's passport was flagged at SFO. 2 hours ago, he tried to board a flight to Dubai. Airport security detained him, but his lawyer is demanding immediate release. We need to file charges tonight, or he walks and vanishes. Dubai. No extradition treaty with the United States. If Mark reached Dubai, he'd be untouchable, living off the millions he'd stolen and embezzled free while my children remained dead. I looked at Jim, then back at Diana's screen, showing Elena's smiling face beneath the headline. File them now, I said, before he runs. Maria filed emergency charges at 11:47 p.m. By midnight, Mark Castellano was formally arrested at San Francisco International Airport on multiple counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. But 2 days later, while Diana's article was still being fact-checked, a different call came. The Sacramento police call came at dawn. Judge Robertson, we found human remains buried at Mark Castellano's former property. Ground-penetrating radar, 12 feet deep. We need you to identify possible victims. The Sacramento Police Cold Case Unit, following an anonymous tip later traced to Victor Reyes, had deployed ground-penetrating radar at Mark's former rental property in Sacramento, a house he'd sold 6 months after his first wife Jennifer disappeared in 2013. The radar had detected anomalies consistent with buried remains. I drove to the excavation site with Jim, watching heavy machinery carefully remove earth layer by layer. 12 feet down, they found her. Remains identified as Jennifer Morrison Castellano. The lead detective told me his voice flat with professional detachment that didn't quite mask his disgust. Reported missing October 2013. Your son-in-law's first wife. She was an elementary school teacher, 43 years old. Buried wrapped in plastic 12 feet down. 12 feet down, wrapped in plastic. Mark's first wife had been buried like construction debris beneath the property he sold 6 months after her disappearance. Jennifer Morrison Castellano had been missing for 12 years. Police had investigated her disappearance as a potential runaway. She'd been depressed. Friends said, struggling with health issues. Mark had played the devastated husband perfectly, even hiring private investigators to search for her. All while she was buried in his backyard. Dr. Okafor conducted the bone analysis personally. When she called with results, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many bodies and not enough justice. Bone marrow analysis shows elevated arsenic consistent with chronic poisoning. Same pattern as Elena. He's been doing this for at least 12 years, Maxwell. Jennifer wasn't his first victim. She was his first successful murder. I sat in my truck at the excavation site, watching them photograph Jennifer's skeletal remains, and tried to process the scope. Mark hadn't started with Elena. He'd practiced, refined his method, learned from Jennifer's murder how to better hide the next one. Rachel Morrison, 58 years old. Jennifer's younger sister and a middle school principal had spent 12 years quietly investigating her sister's disappearance, enduring accusations of paranoia while knowing Mark had killed her. She called me within hours of the remains being identified. I knew. Her voice broke 12 years of carrying that knowledge finally validated. God help me, I knew Mark killed her. Jennifer was sick for months before she disappeared. Hair loss, joint, pain, nausea, just like your daughter. But the police said she ran away, said her depression explained everything. No one believed me. Rachel Morrison wept on the phone, 12 years of knowing her sister was murdered, and 12 years of being called paranoid finally validated. Too late. Always too late. I believed you, I said quietly. I believe you now. Will you testify? Yes. God, yes. Whatever it takes to make sure he never walks free. 3 victims, Jennifer in 2013, David in 2015, Elena in 2025, 12 years of systematic family annihilation, each murder funding Mark's lifestyle until he was ready to kill again. And I'd been next. But the worst discovery came 3 days later at the FBI office in San Francisco. The FBI Digital Forensics Unit specialized in recovering data from damaged devices. When Jim requested they review evidence from David's 2015 crash, I didn't understand why. The case had been closed a decade ago. What could they possibly find? Phone was in the evidence locker from the 2015 crash, the FBI tech said, holding a corroded water-damaged device in gloved hands. Water damaged, but we recovered the drive. Judge Robertson, there's a voice memo. Recorded 10 minutes before impact. My heart stopped. 10 minutes before the crash that killed my son, he'd recorded a voice memo on his phone. The tech played it, and David's voice, young, urgent, alive, filled the small evidence room. Okay, this is probably nothing, but I'm documenting it just in case. David sounded nervous, uncertain. Mark was at the house yesterday while Elena and Maxwell were at the vineyard. I came back early and found him in Dad's study, photographing the family trust documents. He said he was just checking some figures for Elena, but something feels wrong about him. The way he looked when I caught him. Like I'd interrupted something criminal. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Just listen to my son's voice after 10 years of silence. I'm going to show Dad the photos I took tonight. Warn Elena too. She trusts Mark completely, but I think he's planning something with the estate. If anything happens to me, God, I sound paranoid. Nothing will happen, but if something does, don't trust Mark. Don't let him near the family finances. There's something wrong with. The memo cut off. Then came the sound of tires screeching, David's gasp, the sickening crunch of metal, a scream. My son's scream, then terrible final silence. Play it again, I said. Maxwell, we don't need to. Jim started. Play it again. That's my son testifying from the grave. How many times had I replayed David's accident in my mind, wondering if I could have prevented it? And all along, he'd died trying to save us. They played it 3 times. Each time I heard David's warning more clearly. Each time the crash sounds hit harder. My son had discovered Mark's scheme, had photographed evidence, had been racing to show me to warn Elena to stop what was coming, and Mark had cut his brake line, murdered him, then spent 10 years perfecting his method on Elena using the same inheritance scheme David had tried to expose. If David had survived that night, Elena would still be alive. I would never have been poisoned. Jennifer's body would have been found years ago. One conversation, one warning David never got to deliver would have saved everything. I sat in the FBI office, hands covering my face, as David's voice played for the third time. My son had known. He'd been racing to warn us, and Mark had murdered him for it, just like he'd murder Elena a decade later, just like he'd tried to murder me. Jim's hand gripped my shoulder. I couldn't cry. The rage was too cold, too absolute. David's voice was evidence now, the best kind truth from beyond the grave. As David's voice faded into crash sounds for the third time, Jim's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went white. Maxwell Mark just posted bail. Federal judge in San Francisco overruled Maria's no bail request. He's out. The room tilted. Out. A serial killer with 3 confirmed murders and a flight attempt, and some judge had released him. And according to courthouse security, Jim's voice was tight. He never went home. His GPS monitor shows him driving north on Highway 29. Highway 29, north, toward Napa Valley, toward the Robertson Vineyard, toward my home. I drove to the Robertson estate knowing Mark would be there. Jim had called to warn me away, but I didn't listen. Tomorrow, Diana's article would publish. Tomorrow, Maria would file charges. But tonight, I needed to see Mark's face when he realized everything was gone. I found Mark kneeling in the mud near Catherine's oak tree, feeding photographs into a fire, my daughter's wedding, my son's graduation, Catherine's funeral. Gasoline cans lined the path to the estate office. He looked up when my headlights swept across him, and I saw the face of a man who'd already lost everything, but didn't know how to stop destroying. Maxwell. His voice was flat dead. Come to watch the show. I got out of the truck slowly, my 72-year-old body aching from days without sleep. The fire cast orange light across Mark's mud-streaked face, across the photographs, curling black in the flames. Elena's wedding photo, her white dress bright against the vineyard sunset, curled and blackened, her smile disappearing into ash. Mark had killed her, and now he was erasing proof she'd ever smiled. They found Jennifer's body this morning, I said quietly. 12 feet deep at your Sacramento property. Dr. Okafor says arsenic same as Elena. Mark fed another photograph to the flames. David's college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. And we recovered David's phone from the crash. I took a step closer. He recorded a voice memo, 10 minutes before you murdered him. Talks about catching you photographing the family trust documents. Says he was coming to warn me and Elena. Mark's hands stopped. The photograph of David fluttered into the fire untouched. That's what this is about. I gestured at the gasoline cans, the burning photos, the documents scattered around him. You think you can erase the evidence by burning family memories? He stood, and I saw the rage that had been building for years, through Sunday dinners and birthday parties and family Christmases, finally breaking free. You have no idea what it's like. His voice rose cracking. Marrying into wealth, being tolerated like hired help at my own dinner table. The poor son-in-law. Mark from the wrong side of Napa. His hands clenched into fists. I made this vineyard profitable. I saved this estate from bankruptcy. I earned this place. By poisoning my daughter for 2 years, she refused to sell. Mark's voice rose to a roar that echoed across the vineyard rows. The market was perfect. $15 million for the property. But Elena wanted to keep making wine like it was 1950. She was in the way. So was David. So was Jennifer. So was I. David was going to ruin everything. Mark kicked over a gasoline can, fuel spilling across the mud. Found the trust documents, started asking questions. Would have told you, told Elena. I couldn't let that happen. So you cut his brake line. It was supposed to look like an accident. It did look like an accident. 10 years, Maxwell. 10 years, nobody questioned it. Mark's laugh was jagged, broken. Then Elena started getting suspicious, started reviewing the books, found discrepancies. So I gave her tea, every afternoon, just a quarter teaspoon of powder, so gradual, so gentle. How long had this rage festered inside him through Sunday dinners, birthday parties, family Christmases, while he smiled and planned our deaths? And me, the pills Dr. Ashford prescribed. You were stubborn. Mark's face twisted. Wouldn't sign the conservatorship. Wouldn't die on schedule. 6 months I watched you take those pills every morning waiting for symptoms. But you're like Catherine too, goddamn tough to die when convenient. He picked up another gasoline can, unscrewed the cap. It was supposed to be mine, all of it, the vineyard, the estate, the Robertson name. I worked for it. I earned it. They didn't deserve it. Mark started pouring gasoline toward the estate office liquid, glugging from the can fumes thick in the night air. David didn't deserve to live. Elena didn't deserve her own family home. They were born into it. Mark's voice was rising to a scream. You were born into it. Catherine inherited it. None of you worked for it. None of you earned it. Do you know what it's like being the charity case who married up, being tolerated, being patronized? He struck a match, so you killed them. I took what I deserved. The match fell toward the gasoline trail. I lunged. 72 years old, exhausted, heartbroken, but I was faster. I hit Mark like I'd once tackled players in college football, before law school, before the bench, back when I was just Maxwell Robertson from a farm family who'd earned every acre through work. We crashed into the mud, the match extinguishing gasoline, soaking into earth instead of igniting. Mark fought like a cornered animal, screaming, clawing, but I had rage on my side. Rage for Elena, dying slowly over 2 years. Rage for David, killed at 30 trying to save us. Rage for Jennifer, buried 12 feet deep like trash. My hands found his throat. Not worth it, Maxwell. Jim Brennan's voice. Jim's hands pulling me off, strong and sure. I hadn't heard him arrive, hadn't seen his truck. But he was there, phone in hand, recording light, blinking red. Got every word recorded, Jim said. Holding up the phone, full confession, Jennifer David, Elena the pills. Everything, class warfare, and earning the estate. All of it. Mark was gasping in the mud, his Armani suit destroyed, his perfect facade shattered. Police sirens wailed up the vineyard road. Red and blue lights strobed across Catherine's oak tree as Napa County Sheriff's deputies arrived their cruisers, sliding to stops in the mud. Mark tried to stand, tried to run. Officers swarmed him, forcing him down, handcuffs clicking around wrists that had poisoned 3 people and destroyed 4 lives. It was supposed to be mine. Mark's scream echoed across the vineyard as they lifted him. I earned it. They didn't deserve it. Do you know what it's like being the poor son-in-law? The officers led him away past the still smoldering photographs, past Catherine's oak tree, where Elena had buried the evidence that would destroy him, past the estate he'd murdered 3 people trying to steal. I watched the taillights disappear down the vineyard road, Jim's hand steady on my shoulder. Tomorrow the article would publish. Tomorrow charges would be filed. But tonight, I'd watched Mark Castellano confess to everything while trying to burn my family's legacy. And Jim had captured every word. At dawn, Diana Torres's article went live. By 7 a.m., it had 200,000 shares. By 8 a.m., national news trucks lined the vineyard road. By 9 a.m., Maria Gonzalez filed formal charges, 3 counts, first-degree murder, 1 count, attempted murder, witness intimidation, financial fraud, arson. Mark's face filled every screen in America, not as a respected Silicon Valley attorney, but as a serial family killer. The public trial had begun. At 6:03 a.m., Diana Torres's expose went live on the San Francisco Chronicle website. I watched from Jim's office as the view counter climbed 5,200 and 800. Within 2 hours, it hit 10,000. By noon, my daughter's face filled every television screen in America under the headline, The Vineyard Tragedy. How Silicon Valley lawyer murdered 2 heirs for $15 million wine empire. Elena smiled from that photograph, taken at the vineyard 2 years before the poison began, before Mark started killing her, before I knew what he was. Maxwell Diana's voice crackled over Jim's speakerphone at 8 a.m. We just hit 10,000 shares. CNN picked it up. NBC is calling. This is bigger than I expected. America is furious. I could hear it in her voice. Not just professional satisfaction, but genuine shock at the viral response. The article had documented everything: Jennifer's burial, David's voice memo, Elena's toxicology, my attempted murder, Mark's recorded confession. 20,000 words, 53 pieces of evidence, 12 witness statements. And America was reading every word. By 10 a.m., #JusticeForElena had been tweeted 47,000 times. My daughter's face smiling at her vineyard was being shared by strangers who'd never met her, but understood she'd been murdered. Jim refreshed the news feeds on 3 monitors. Mark's prestigious Silicon Valley law firm issued a statement at 9:15 a.m. defending him as a valued partner, presumed innocent. By 11:30 a.m., they'd deleted it. By noon, they'd issued a new statement distancing themselves from his alleged crimes. "They're cutting him loose," Jim said, scrolling through the firm's revised press release. "The evidence is too overwhelming. They can't defend this and keep their reputation." I watched Mark's professional facade crumble in real time. The respected attorney, the grieving widower, the concerned son-in-law, all of it disintegrating under the weight of documented murder. At 9 a.m., exactly, Maria Gonzalez held a press conference. "Today we've filed charges against Mark Castellano for 3 counts of first-degree murder spanning 12 years. Her voice was steady, prosecutorial, designed for cameras. Jennifer Morrison Castellano in 2013, David Maxwell Robertson in 2015, Elena Robertson Castellano in 2025. Additionally, 1 count of attempted murder against retired Superior Court Judge Maxwell Robertson, plus charges of financial fraud, witness intimidation, and arson. The evidence package behind her on the table was over 500 pages thick. 12 sworn witness statements, forensic reports, financial records, security footage, David's voice memo, Jim's recording of Mark's confession. "The evidence is overwhelming," Maria continued. "Forensic financial testimonial and recorded confession. We are confident in securing conviction on all counts." I watched Mark's arrest on 3 different news channels simultaneously. Each one showed him in handcuffs at 4:40 p.m., being led from his law office, face impassive, the same man who'd smiled at me over breakfast while feeding me poison. He had no comment for the media. His lawyers flanked him expensive suits and grim expressions, already earning their retainer fees. "They arrested him at his office," I said to Jim. "He wasn't running. He actually thought he could lawyer his way out of this." Jim's expression was troubled. He still might. Money buys the best defense. The bail hearing convened at 11 p.m. that night, an emergency session that ran past midnight. I sat in the gallery beside Jim, exhausted from 18 hours of watching my family's tragedy become national news. Gerald Hastings stood before the judge, polished and confident despite the hour. "Your Honor, Mr. Castellano has deep community ties, a successful legal practice spanning 15 years, and no prior criminal record. The ankle monitor ensures compliance. Bail is appropriate." Maria countered immediately. "Your Honor, we found $800,000 in cash and a fake Canadian passport in Mr. Castellano's office safe. This man is a demonstrated flight risk who attempted to flee to Dubai last week. He should be held without bail." The judge, exhausted at midnight, weighing flight risk against constitutional rights, set bail at $5 million with GPS ankle monitoring. How much justice could money buy? $5 million for temporary freedom. The best lawyers for endless delays. Could wealth actually outrun 3 murders? Gerald had the money ready. At 2 a.m., Mark Castellano walked out of Napa County Jail, wearing an ankle monitor, a free man until trial. I stood in the courthouse gallery watching him sign release papers, watching the ankle monitor technician fit the device around his leg, watching him buy temporary freedom with money stolen from the family he'd destroyed. He paused beside me in the hallway as officers escorted him out. His voice was a venomous whisper only I could hear. "You think you've won?" His eyes were cold, calculating. "I have the best lawyers money can buy. I'll tie you up in court for years. Motions, appeals, continuances. You'll die before you see me convicted, old man." I met his gaze steadily. This man who'd murdered my children, who'd tried to murder me, who'd bought his temporary freedom with blood money. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said quietly. "One of us will die before this is over. But it won't be me, and it won't be in freedom." His face darkened, rage flickering beneath the controlled exterior. But the ankle monitor officer was calling him, and courthouse security was watching. He had to leave. Had to maintain the appearance of compliance. I watched him walk out into the pre-dawn darkness, knowing this setback was temporary. Justice delayed wasn't justice denied. Not this time. As Mark's car disappeared, Jim's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went grim. "Rachel Morrison just texted Maria. Says Mark's first wife, Jennifer, had a sister who died in a hit-and-run 6 months after Jennifer disappeared." Jim looked up at me. Woman was contesting Jennifer's will, questioning why Mark inherited everything. The courthouse hallway seemed to tilt. "Rachel thinks we need to exhume her, too." Jim's voice was quiet. "Maxwell. How many people has he killed?" I had no answer. Jennifer in 2013, David in 2015, Elena in 2025, me attempted. And now possibly Jennifer's sister killed for questioning an inheritance. 5 victims, maybe more we hadn't discovered yet. Mark Castellano had been killing for 12 years, systematically eliminating anyone who threatened his carefully constructed wealth. And now he was free walking the streets with an ankle monitor and $5 million in bail, threatening to tie us up in court until I died of old age. But he'd made a mistake. He'd left evidence. He'd created witnesses. He'd confessed on camera. And I had time. Not as much as I wanted, but enough. Enough to see justice done. The call came at 6 a.m. Mark had cut his ankle monitor. The private ankle monitoring contractor, required by law to alert authorities within minutes of signal loss, tracked Mark's GPS to the vineyard before the device was destroyed. Jim's voice was grim on the phone. GPS history shows his last location. The vineyard. He's going back to destroy what he couldn't steal. I was in my truck before Jim finished the sentence, racing north on Highway 29 as dawn broke over the valley. Mark had posted $5 million. Bale had the best lawyers money could buy, had every resource to flee the country with his fake passport and hidden cash. Instead, he'd gone back to the vineyard. Maxwell, don't go there alone. Jim's voice was urgent through my truck's speakers. If he's desperate enough to cut the monitor, he's desperate enough for anything. I'm 10 minutes behind you, but I couldn't wait. Couldn't let Mark destroy what was left of my family's legacy while I drove cautiously and called for backup. Smoke rose from the estate office as I pulled into the vineyard drive. Not the massive plume of a building fire, controlled smoke, deliberate burning. Mark was systematically destroying records. I found him in the courtyard near Catherine's oak tree, feeding documents into a metal barrel he'd turned into an incinerator. Gasoline cans lined the path to the estate office. Family photographs curled and blackened in the flames. Catherine's journals, Elena's baby pictures, David's school records, 40 years of family history disappearing into ash. He looked up when he heard my truck, and I saw a man who'd crossed beyond reason into pure destructive rage. Come to watch. His voice was hoarse from smoke. Came to see me erase the precious Robertson legacy. Smoke rose from the estate office where Catherine's journals had been stored for 40 years. Mark was burning my wife's handwriting, my children's baby photos, the records of 5 generations. You can't have it, so you're destroying it, I said, getting out of the truck slowly, like a child breaking a toy. You have no idea what it's like. His voice rose, breaking. Growing up with nothing, eating ramen while my classmates vacationed in Europe, working 3 jobs through law school while they partied on trust funds. I earned my place at that table, Maxwell. I earned it with blood and sweat and scholarships. So, you married Elena for her money. I married Elena because she was my ticket. His confession came in torrents, now years of resentment flooding out. Beautiful, kind, trusting Elena, who saw the poor scholarship student and thought he needed love. She was my way into this world. Then she and David stood in my way. I listened to Mark justify murdering my children because he'd grown up poor, as if scholarships and hard work entitled him to kill, as if Elena's life was a prize he'd earned. David found the trust documents, I said quietly, was going to warn us. David was going to ruin everything. Mark's hands clenched into fists. Everything I'd built, everything I'd clawed my way toward. So I cut his brake line, made it look like an accident. And it worked, Maxwell. 10 years nobody questioned it. 10 years I refined my method. On Elena. Elena refused to sell. Refused to liquidate. Wanted to keep making wine like it was some noble calling. Mark's laugh was jagged. She had $15 million in property, and she wanted to keep stomping grapes. She was in the way, so I gave her tea. Every afternoon, just a little poison. So gentle she never suspected her loving husband was killing her. You murdered my children because you felt entitled to their inheritance. I took a step closer. That's not class warfare, Mark. That's just murder. He grabbed a gasoline can, unscrewed the cap. They didn't deserve it. His voice was a scream now. Born into wealth. Never struggled. Never fought for anything. I deserved this place more than they ever did. I earned it. He started pouring gasoline toward the main house. Jim's truck appeared on the vineyard road, but Mark was already striking a match. I didn't think, didn't plan, just lunged. 72 years old, exhausted from days without sleep, but I hit Mark before the match touched gasoline. We crashed into the mud, the match extinguishing. I heard Jim shout, heard police sirens in the distance, but all I could see was Mark's face, the man who'd murdered my children, who tried to murder me, who was now trying to burn their memories. My hands found his throat for the second time. Jim pulled me off. Again. Phone already recording, capturing Mark's gasped confession about scholarships and entitlement and earning the right to kill the wealthy. Police swarmed the courtyard. Mark was arrested for bail-jumping arson assault. Jim showed them the video Mark's third recorded confession this time, with full context about class warfare and resentment and viewing murder as justified redistribution. Mark wasn't unique. Somewhere another spouse was plotting. Another family was being bled dry. Another killer was weaponizing class resentment into murder. But tonight we'd stopped one of them. The emergency bail hearing convened at 2 p.m. Judge Helen Morrison, the same judge who dismissed Mark's competency petition against me, presided with ice in her voice. Your Honor, the defendant violated bail within hours. Maria Gonzalez stood before the bench with Jim's video evidence, fled to the victim's property, committed arson, assaulted a 72-year-old man, confessed on camera again to multiple murders with class resentment as justification. He is incapable of complying with any release conditions. Gerald Hastings tried, argued temporary insanity, mental break, trauma response. But the video of Mark's coherent ideological justification for murder undermined every word. Mr. Castellano, Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courtroom, you are remanded to custody without bail until trial. Clearly no amount of money can ensure public safety or your appearance. Mark was screaming as bailiffs restrained him. It was supposed to be mine. I earned it. They didn't deserve it. The courtroom doors closed on his rage. I sat back in the gallery gym beside me, watching Mark's final public breakdown. No bail this time. No walking out at 2 a.m. with an ankle monitor and whispered threats. Mark Castellano would sit in a cell until his trial. And when that trial came, we had everything 3 confessions on. Recording forensic evidence, 12 witnesses, and his own words screaming his guilt. The chase was over. Now came justice. As Mark's screams faded down the courthouse hallway, Maria pulled me aside, her expression serious. Maxwell, we need to talk about trial strategy. Her voice was quiet, professional. Mark's confession is powerful, but his lawyers will claim mental break, temporary insanity, class trauma. We have 6 months to build an airtight case. She met my eyes. Are you ready to testify about your own poisoning, about finding Elena's body, about listening to David's voice memo? I answered Maria's question the only way I could. Yes, I'll testify about all of it. The 3 months between Mark's final arrest and trial felt both endless and insufficient. Maria Gonzalez transformed her conference room into a war room crime scene, photos, toxicology reports, financial records, witness statements covering every wall. 3 months to build a case against a man who'd spent 12 years killing my family. Maxwell, your testimony is the heart of this case. Maria stood before her evidence wall, gesturing at Elena's photo. You humanize Elena and David. The jury needs to see them through your eyes, not just as victims, but as your children. I met all the witnesses during preparation. Victor Reyes nervous practicing his confession. I know what I did was wrong. Mark paid me $50,000. I cut the brake line. I knew David would die. Sam Whitmore consumed with guilt, describing how Mark convinced him the powder was vitamins. Dr. Ashford ashamed, admitting he'd destroyed evidence to save his career. Rachel Morrison determined after 12 years of knowing her sister was murdered. Maria conducted mock cross-examinations, preparing them for Gerald Hastings' attacks. She was relentless, exposing weaknesses, forcing them to face their complicity until their testimony was unshakable. The night before trial, I drove to the cemetery alone. I stood at Elena's grave, then David's, the February cold seeping through my coat. Tomorrow I would testify about finding Elena's funeral, reading her letter, watching her husband poison me on video. I promised her justice. Tomorrow I'd deliver. Elena, David, tomorrow I testify. Tomorrow the world hears what he did to you. I touched Elena's headstone, then David's. I promise you justice. Finally. The trial began with a media circus. National news trucks lined the courthouse. The 12 jurors, ranging from a retired school teacher to a vineyard worker to a tech executive, sat in stunned silence as Maria delivered opening statements. The evidence will show that Mark Castellano is a serial killer. Maria's voice was steady prosecutorial precision, honed over 73 homicide trials. Over 12 years, he systematically murdered 3 people for financial gain. Jennifer Morrison Castellano, in 2013, poisoned with arsenic, buried in his backyard. David Maxwell Robertson in 2015, brake line cut, murdered to silence his discovery of trust document theft. Elena Robertson Castellano in 2025, poisoned with arsenic over 2 years, while her husband smiled at family dinners. And finally, attempted murder of retired Superior Court Judge Maxwell Robertson, the same poison, the same method, the same calculating patience. Gerald Hastings countered with reasonable doubt, suggesting the prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence and witnesses with their own criminal motives. But on day 3, I took the stand. Maria handed me Elena's letter. The same letter I'd found in the rain under Catherine's oak tree wax seal, broken my daughter's final words. Judge Robertson, would you please read this letter to the jury? My voice was steady. 30 years of courtroom experience kept it level, even as my heart shattered. Dad, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Mark has been poisoning me. I know it sounds crazy, but I've documented everything. The tea, the symptoms, the toxicology results Dr. Ashford destroyed. Please don't let him get away with this. I love you. Several jurors were crying before I finished. The courtroom sat in horrified silence. Then Maria played the security footage. The courtroom watched in silent horror as the recording played. Mark switching pill bottles at 4 a.m. in my bathroom, then weeks later watching me swallow poison at breakfast. That slight satisfied smile on his face. The jury saw it. The premeditation, the sadistic pleasure, the calculating patience of a man who'd murdered 3 people and was confident enough to record his 4th attempt. Gerald's cross-examination tried to suggest my grief clouded my judgment. Judge Robertson, isn't it true? Your grief might cloud your judgment about my client's innocence. I met his eyes with the calm I'd perfected over 3 decades on the bench. Mr. Hastings, I presided over this courthouse for 30 years. I know the difference between grief and evidence. Your client murdered my children. The evidence proves it. Gerald had no response. For 3 weeks, witness after witness took the stand, building an insurmountable mountain of evidence. Victor Reyes played the recording of Mark ordering David's hit, his voice breaking. I cut the brake line. Knew what would happen. I'm sorry. Sam Whitmore described adding poison to Elena's tea. Thought it was vitamins. 1/4 teaspoon every afternoon in her Earl Grey. God forgive me. Dr. Ashford admitted destroying the toxicology. He blackmailed me, found out about prescription irregularities, threatened my career. So, I deleted the test showing 18.7 parts per million arsenic. Dr. Okafor presented forensic proof, 27.8 parts per million arsenic in hair, liver, kidney tissue, absolutely fatal. Elena Robertson Castellano was systematically poisoned over minimum 24 months. Dr. Ashford took the stand, next his once confident bearing replaced by visible shame. He'd aged a decade since his confession months ago. Maria was surgical in her questioning. Dr. Ashford, you've already entered a guilty plea separate from this trial. Tell the jury what you pled guilty to and what sentence you're serving. Ashford's voice was barely audible. I pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, medical malpractice, and obstruction of justice. I surrendered my medical license to the California Medical Board. It was permanently revoked in October. In exchange for my testimony against Mark Castellano, the DA reduced my sentence to 5 years at San Quentin State Prison. I'm eligible for parole after 3 years. I begin serving immediately after this trial concludes. You destroyed toxicology results showing Elena Robertson was being poisoned for $200,000. Yes, Ashford's tears were genuine, his voice breaking. I received the arsenic test results 18 months before Elena died. 18.7 parts per million, well into lethal range. I called her privately to discuss the findings. That same night, Mark Castellano contacted me. He had evidence of my prescription irregularities' minor violations, but enough to destroy my career. He offered $200,000 to delete the test results and tell Elena everything was normal. And you accepted. I accepted. I chose my career and my retirement over her life. Ashford looked directly at me for the first time, his face ravaged. Judge Robertson, no sentence will ever be enough. Your daughter trusted me for 23 years. I delivered her as a baby, and I let her die to protect myself. I have to live with that forever, but I can at least make sure her murderer never walks free. Rachel Morrison spoke of 12 years suspecting. Always knew Mark killed Jennifer. Couldn't prove it. No body, no evidence, until now. How do you defend a man when his own victims testify from beyond the grave, When their voices captured moments before murder, condemn him. And then the FBI played David's voice memo. My son's voice filled the courtroom. Young, uncertain, alive. Okay, this is probably nothing, but I'm documenting it. Mark was photographing the family trust documents. Something feels wrong about him. Going to show Dad tonight and warn Elena too. If anything happens, God, I sound paranoid. Nothing will happen. But if something does, don't trust Mark. Then the crash, the screaming, the silence. The jury sat frozen. More than half had tears streaming down their faces now. One woman covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The foreman stared at the table, unable to look up. Even the bailiff in the corner wiped his eyes. I watched Mark at the defense table. His face had gone pale, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking as he heard David's voice, the son-in-law he'd murdered, condemning him from 10 years in the grave. Maria let the silence stretch. Let the jury absorb what they had heard. A young man racing to save his family, recording evidence in case something happened, then dying in the crash Mark had orchestrated. After 3 weeks of prosecution testimony, Maria stood. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. The evidence mountain was complete. Confessions, forensics recordings, 12 witnesses. 3 murders documented across 12 years. Attempted murder captured on video. Mark Castellano's guilt proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Gerald Hastings stood to begin the defense case. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Lawrence Hartman. Dr. Lawrence Hartman, 61 years old, Harvard-trained forensic psychiatrist who'd testified in 43 high-profile murder trials, took the stand. Mark Castellano would plead not guilty by reason of insanity, childhood trauma, class warfare psychosis, diminished capacity. The battle wasn't over. It was entering a new phase. Gerald Hastings spent 3 days trying to talk his client out of it. Dr. Hartman's insanity testimony had been weak but defensible. Mark Castellano taking the stand would be suicide. But Mark insisted. Week 4 of trial, against his attorney's advice, Mark Castellano demanded to testify. He believed he could make them understand. He was catastrophically wrong. I sat in the gallery next to Jim as Mark was sworn in. His hand didn't tremble on the Bible. Gerald led him through a carefully scripted direct examination about his difficult childhood, his years working at the vineyard, his love for Elena. Mark performed well, voice, steady eyes meeting the jury. He painted himself as a victim of circumstance, a working-class man trapped by generational wealth and family expectations. Several jurors nodded sympathetically. Then Maria Gonzalez stood for cross-examination. She moved like a surgeon approaching an operating table. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. She set a small device on the podium and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the courtroom, the recording from Jim's investigation. They were in my way. The vineyard was supposed to be mine. I worked for it. I earned it. Maria let the silence stretch. Voice analysis shows 99.8% match Mr. Castellano. Is this you? Mark's jaw tightened. Out of context. I was upset. I didn't mean... Maria clicked a remote. The courtroom screens lit with security footage, Mark and Maxwell Robertson's bathroom at 4:17 a.m., carefully switching pill bottles. Another angle showed Maxwell at breakfast taking the poison vitamins, while Mark watched from the doorway, a small, satisfied smile on his face. Did you switch Judge Robertson's medication with arsenic-laced pills? Mark's face flushed. That's not what it looks like. Maria placed an evidence bag on the witness rail. Fake Canadian passport and the name Michael Collins. $800,000 cash found in your office safe. Both discovered the day you were arrested. Were you planning to flee the country, Mr. Castellano? Gerald objected. Judge Morrison overruled. Mark's composure began cracking. I needed options. The family was trying to take everything I built. Everything you built. Maria's voice cut like steel. You married into the Robertson family in 2013. What exactly did you build? I managed the vineyard. I increased profits. I made that estate worth $15 million by murdering the people who owned it. Gerald shot to his feet. Objection, argumentative. Sustained. Rephrase, Ms. Gonzalez. Maria moved closer to the witness stand. Mr. Castellano, let me ask directly. Did you cut David Robertson's brake line in October 2015? Mark's scream echoed through the courtroom. They were in my way. The jury sat frozen. He'd just confessed to 3 murders on the witness stand under oath. The vineyard was supposed to be mine. I worked for it. I earned it. David found the documents about Jennifer. Elena wouldn't sell. They didn't deserve it. They were handed everything while Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like gunfire. "Order, Mr. Castellano, you are confessing to murder under oath. Do you understand what you are saying?" Mark's face contorted with rage and something darker, an entitled fury that had simmered for 12 years. "I understand perfectly. I killed Jennifer because she wanted to leave and take half my money. I killed David because he was going to expose me. I killed Elena because she refused to sell the vineyard that I built into what it became. And I tried to kill him," Mark pointed at me, "because he wouldn't stop investigating." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Gerald Hastings sat frozen at the defense table, his case obliterated by his own client. Jim's hand found my shoulder as I sat perfectly still, unable to process what I'd just witnessed. Mark had confessed, under oath, in open court, to everything. Judge Morrison ordered a recess. Court officers surrounded Mark, who continued screaming about class warfare, and earned wealth as they escorted him out. Maria met my eyes across the courtroom. She didn't smile. We both knew what came next was formality. The trial was over. 2 weeks later, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. We, the jury, find the defendant Mark Castellano guilty of count 1, first-degree murder of Jennifer Morrison Castellano. Guilty. 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 Each repetition of the word felt like a door closing on 12 years of grief investigation. Fear. Mark collapsed at the defense table. I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the gallery railing, not trusting myself to move. Guilty of count 2, first-degree murder of David Maxwell Robertson. Guilty of count 3, first-degree murder of Elena Robertson Castellano. Guilty of count 4, attempted murder of Maxwell Robertson. Guilty on all counts of fraud and embezzlement. Judge Morrison remanded Mark to custody pending sentencing. The courtroom remained silent except for quiet crying from Rachel Morrison in the row behind me. Gerald Hastings could offer no comfort. His client had destroyed himself on the witness stand. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Rachel spoke for Jennifer, describing 12 years of wondering if her sister's death was really suicide. Jim spoke for David, reading from the voice memo David had recorded moments before Mark's hired killer cut his brake line. I spoke for Elena. "My daughter died." Slowly I read from prepared remarks, my voice steady despite the tears on my face. "Poisoned daily for 2 years by the man she loved and trusted. She suffered headaches, nausea, organ failure. She thought she had cancer. She never knew her husband was killing her for money. My son died trying to warn us. Mark didn't just take their lives. He stole their trust, their safety, their futures. He took my children and left me with nothing but the truth they died trying to reveal. How do you measure justice? 3 life sentences for 3 murders, a man dying in prison for the children he killed? It would never be enough, but it was all the law could give. Judge Morrison's voice rang with finality. "Mr. Castellano, you are the most depraved criminal I have encountered in 30 years on the bench. The level of planning manipulation and callous disregard for human life is extraordinary. Count 1 murder of Jennifer Morrison. Castellano, life without parole. Count 2, murder of David Maxwell. Robertson, life without parole. Count 3, murder of Elena Robertson. Castellano, life without parole. Sentences to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will die there." Officers removed the defendant. Mark's screams echoed through the courtroom. "It was mine. I earned it. You don't understand." But the doors were already closing. I sat in the gallery, Jim's hand on my shoulder, silent tears streaming down my face. 3 consecutive life sentences. Mark Castellano would never breathe free air again. Justice at last had been served. As Mark's screams faded down the courthouse corridor, Maria handed me an envelope. From the DA's Victim Services. "The Robertson family vineyard estate has been held in trust during trial. You have decisions to make, Maxwell. What do you want to do with the legacy Mark tried to destroy?" I looked at the envelope, then at Jim. The trial was over. Mark would die in prison. But the vineyard, Elena's vineyard, Catherine's legacy, 5 generations of family history still waited. What came next? I opened the envelope 3 days after Mark's sentencing. My hands shook as I read the estate documents the Robertson family vineyard valued at $15 million held in trust during the trial now returned to my control. Maria had asked what I wanted to do with the legacy Mark tried to destroy. I didn't have an answer then, but sitting alone in my study that night, looking at photographs of Elena laughing in the vineyard rows and David helping Catherine prune the vines, I knew 6 months after the trial ended, the Robertson vineyard looked almost like itself again. The fire-damaged outbuildings Mark had torched were rebuilt. The scorched earth where he'd burned family records was replanted with native grasses. Where Catherine's oak stood in the distance, I'd added something new, a memorial garden with 2 stone benches each bearing a bronze plaque. Elena Marie Robertson Castellano, beloved daughter. David Maxwell Robertson, beloved son. The plaques caught September sunlight as I walked past them each morning. The vineyard wasn't just restored, it was transformed. The main house now held offices for the Elena and David Memorial Foundation, established with half the estate's value, $7.5 million. Funding scholarships, counseling services, legal aid, and educational programs about recognizing abuse patterns. Every month, volunteers gathered around the large dining table, where Mark had once plotted murder, now covered with applications and support program schedules instead of his schemes. I stood in the foundation office one afternoon, looking at our first scholarship recipient's photograph. Sophia Bennett, 19, had survived her stepfather's attempt to poison her mother and now studied forensic science at UC Davis. Elena's money was saving her future. That felt right. Judge Robertson. A gentle voice interrupted my thoughts. "I'm Dorothy Callahan. I heard about your foundation helping poisoning victims' families. My sister. Well, I'd like to volunteer if you need help." I turned to see a woman of about 68, silver hair pulled back in a soft bun, kind eyes behind reading glasses. Dorothy Callahan had lost her own sister to domestic violence poisoning 20 years earlier. Something in her calm presence made the foundation office feel less like a memorial and more like a living tribute. "We'd be grateful for your help," I said and meant it. Over the following weeks, Dorothy organized the foundation's educational outreach with precision. She coordinated partnerships with domestic violence shelters, developed curricula about recognizing poisoning symptoms, scheduled speakers for community centers. But more than her organizational skill, Dorothy brought something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: easy companionship without the weight of shared trauma. We began walking the vineyard paths together after foundation meetings. She never pushed, never pried into my grief, never tried to fill the silence with empty comfort. She simply walked beside me occasionally, pointing out a hawk circling overhead, or the way light fell through grape leaves. And somehow, that quiet presence mattered more than any well-meaning platitude ever had. One afternoon as we passed the memorial garden, Dorothy told a story about a library patron who'd insisted the autobiography section should be alphabetized by the subject's birth year rather than last name. Her deadpan delivery made me laugh, actually laugh. Genuine surprised laughter that seemed to come from somewhere deep I'd thought was permanently sealed. The sound surprised me. Joy felt like betrayal, but it wasn't. "It's good to hear, Maxwell," Dorothy smiled warmly. "You made me laugh today," I said weeks later, as we walked between dormant vines on a golden September evening. I didn't think I'd forgotten how, but I had. "Thank you for that, Dorothy." She tucked her hand lightly through my arm, a gesture of companionship, not romance. "Your family wouldn't want you frozen in grief. Honoring them means living fully, not just existing." I knew she was right. Dorothy's presence didn't replace Catherine, nothing ever could. She existed in a different space, offering not the passionate partnership of my marriage, but the gentle healing of shared purpose and quiet understanding. She made me remember that life could hold more than vengeance and justice. It could hold peace. For the first time in 2 years, I believed healing was possible, not forgetting never that. Elena and David would always be present in every foundation scholarship, every educational program, every family helped, but living again in a way they would want me to, finding purpose in their legacy, allowing joy without guilt. As Dorothy and I reached the memorial garden one evening, I noticed something tucked into the bench beneath Elena's plaque, a white envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. No stamp. Hand-delivered. I picked it up frowning and opened it. "Judge Robertson, my name is Claire Donovan. Mark Castellano was married to my cousin before Jennifer Morrison. She died in 2008. The police called it suicide. It wasn't. I have proof." The letter from Claire Donovan sat heavy in my hands as Dorothy and I settled into the foundation office that evening. The claim that Mark's history of violence stretched back to 2008, 6 years before Jennifer Morrison, 8 years before David, was a chilling prospect. If her cousin Amanda truly was his first victim, then Mark had been perfecting his method for 18 years, not 12. "What will you do?" Dorothy asked gently. I folded the letter carefully. What I should have done 2 years ago. I'm going to see him, one last time. The drive to Pelican Bay State Prison took 8 hours north along the California coast. Highway 101 wound through redwood forests and coastal bluffs, the Pacific stretching gray and endless to my left. This time felt different, final. Pelican Bay rose from the northern California coast, like a concrete fortress, gray walls against gray sky, razor wire, gleaming dull in overcast light. Mark Castellano would spend the rest of his life here dying slowly while the world forgot him. The visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. I sat in a booth divided by thick glass, a telephone receiver bolted to the partition. Mark looked nothing like the confident attorney who'd sat at my table. Prison had reduced him: gray hair, gaunt face, desperate eyes. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his thinning frame. He picked up the phone on his side. "Maxwell, I didn't think you'd come. Thank you. I didn't come to help you," I interrupted. "I came to tell you something." His eyes flickered with that old manipulation instinct. "Maxwell, please, my appeals. I need someone who understands law. You know I was railroaded. You failed Mark." The word stopped him mid-sentence. "You murdered Jennifer for insurance money and the freedom to marry someone wealthier." I continued, my voice calm and measured. "You murdered my son because he discovered your crimes. You murdered my daughter slowly, cruelly, for a vineyard you thought you deserved. You tried to murder me to silence the investigation, and you failed at all of it." Mark's face twisted. "I didn't fail. I had 12 years. 12 years of temporary success before complete destruction. Let me tell you what failure looks like, Mark. The vineyard you burned produces wine now. Every bottle bears a label: Elena's Courage Reserve, David's Truth of Vintage. Their names on every harvest, thousands of bottles, their legacy in every glass poured. The foundation you tried to prevent by killing me has helped 89 families in 6 months. 89 families affected by domestic violence, by poisoning, by the kind of crimes you committed. We've funded legal aid, counseling, medical testing, escape plans. Your stolen wealth, the money you murdered for, is saving the people you wanted to destroy." Mark's hand tightened on the receiver. "Elena's documentation and the evidence she gathered about your poisoning is now a training tool. Prosecutors use it. Victim advocates share it. Her courage taught other victims to document abuse, to gather proof, to fight back. You wanted her forgotten. Instead, she's teaching survivors how to defeat monsters like you." "Stop," Mark whispered. "David's voice memo, the recording he made, trying to warn me about you, plays in courthouses across California. District attorneys use it to show victims that speaking up matters even when it seems too late. You murdered him to silence his warning. His warning is now saving lives." I said, "Stop. You're nothing, Mark. A footnote in a story about 2 remarkable people who died trying to protect others. Jennifer Morrison's family remembers her. Rachel visits her grave every month. David's friends established a scholarship in his name. Elena's foundation will help families for generations. What will you leave? A prison number, a forgotten name. You'll die in this cell and be buried in a prison cemetery under a marker with a number, not a name. Meanwhile, they live forever. Every scholarship, every harvest, every family saved. That's your failure." Mark's face crumpled. Through the glass, I watched him age another decade in seconds. "Please," he whispered. "Maxwell, don't go. I can't. I didn't mean..." But I was already standing. "You'll die here forgotten while they live forever in every harvest, every scholarship, every family saved. Goodbye, Mark." "Wait, Maxwell, don't go, please." Mark pounded on the glass as Pelican Bay guards moved toward his booth. I turned and walked away. Behind me, his muffled screaming faded. I didn't look back. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched cold and gray beneath an overcast sky. I breathed the salt air, feeling lighter than I had in months. That chapter was closed. Mark Castellano would rot in that cell for the rest of his life, and I would never think of him again. My phone rang as I reached my truck. Jim Brennan. "Maxwell," his voice was careful. "About Claire Donovan's letter. I had Sacramento PD pull the 2008 file. The suicide ruling was questionable, and there's something else. Mark's financial records show a life insurance payout that year, $300,000. Are you ready to go down this road? It's på Bideskade stas Mendibuosta." I stood in the parking lot of Pelican Bay, holding my phone, Jim's question hanging in the air. "Are you ready to go down this road?" The Pacific wind cut cold through my jacket. Behind me, the prison walls rose gray and impenetrable. Ahead, the long drive home to Dorothy, to the foundation, to the peace I'd finally built. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not. Mark is serving 3 consecutive life sentences. He'll die in that cell regardless of what happened in 2008. I've spent 2 years seeking justice, Jim. I think it's time I focused on living." Jim was silent for a moment. "I understand. If you change your mind, I won't, but thank you for everything." The drive back to Napa took 8 hours. I didn't think about Claire Donovan's letter or Mark's possible earlier victims. I thought about Dorothy's laugh about Sophia Bennett, studying to become a prosecutor, about 89 families who'd found help through Elena and David's foundation. Some investigations needed to end so healing could begin. February 2026, 2 years after Elena's death. 730 days since I'd held my daughter as she died. The vineyard once scarred by Mark's arson now bloomed with white roses, Elena's favorite, planted along every row, their fragrance perfuming the evening air. Over 200 people gathered in the outdoor pavilion among the vines for the 2nd annual Elena and David Memorial Foundation Gala. Donors, volunteers, beneficiaries, community members, faces I'd come to know over months of foundation work. People who believed grief could transform into purpose. Dorothy stood beside me in a simple blue dress, her hand finding mine as I prepared to speak. I rose looking out at the crowd illuminated by golden February light. 2 years ago, I began my voice carrying across the vineyard. I lost my daughter Elena to murder. My son David was killed trying to warn me. I thought my life had ended with theirs. I was wrong. I told them about Elena's notebooks, meticulous records she'd kept documenting, financial irregularities, threats, suspicious behavior, evidence she'd gathered during 2 years of being poisoned. Hoping someone would find it if she died, Elena kept detailed records that helped convict her murderer and his accomplices. I continued. But her legacy extends further. Those same documentation techniques have now led to 3 additional convictions in unrelated domestic violence cases. Families in Sacramento, Fresno, and San Diego are safe today because my daughter taught victims how to gather evidence, how to build a case, how to fight back even when they're afraid. The crowd murmured, several people wiping tears. The foundation has aided 89 families in 2 years. We've funded legal representation counseling services, medical testing, safe housing, escape planning. We've provided scholarships to children who lost parents to violence. We've trained law enforcement on recognizing poisoning patterns. Elena and David's names are on every check we write, every family we help. I paused, my voice breaking. My daughter would be 29 this year. My son would be 41. They deserve to grow old here to see this vineyard thrive, to build their own families. They were robbed of those years, but their legacy lives in every scholarship recipient, every survivor who escapes abuse, every family that finds justice. Sophia Bennett stood then, 23 now. She'd survived her stepfather's attempt to poison her mother, had used foundation support to finish undergraduate studies. Her voice rang clear and strong. I start law school this fall at UC Berkeley. I'm going to be the prosecutor who stops the next killer before he destroys another family. Elena Robertson's courage showed me that victims can fight back, that documentation matters, that speaking up saves lives. I'm going to spend my career making sure her lesson reaches every courtroom in California. The pavilion erupted in applause. Dorothy squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. Then Rachel Morrison stood, Jennifer's sister, 58 years old, a middle school principal who'd spent 12 years refusing to believe her sister committed suicide. My sister Jennifer was hidden for 12 years, buried 12 feet beneath the ground, at Mark's Sacramento property, wrapped in plastic, erased like she never existed. Rachel's voice didn't waver, despite the tears streaming down her face. The police called it suicide. Her husband, Mark Castellano, played the devastated widower, collected $800,000 in life insurance, and moved on to his next victim. I told investigators Jennifer was afraid of him, that she'd called me 2 weeks before she died, saying she wanted a divorce. They said there was no evidence of foul play, called me paranoid, bitter, unable to accept the truth. Her eyes swept the crowd, but I knew. I knew Jennifer didn't kill herself. I knew Mark Castellano murdered her, and I waited. 12 years I waited, collecting what evidence I could, hoping someone would finally listen. Then Maxwell Robertson lost his daughter to the same monster, and unlike the police who dismissed me, Maxwell refused to stop digging. Rachel's voice grew stronger. He found Jennifer. He gave my family closure after 12 years of wondering. He proved I wasn't crazy, proved my sister didn't abandon us. Prove that justice delayed is not justice denied, not when people like Judge Robertson refuse to give up. She looked directly at me. Elena and David Robertson didn't just save their father. Through this foundation, they're saving families every single day. 89 families who might have suffered in silence now have resources, legal aid, hope. That's the real victory. That's how we beat monsters like Mark Castellano, not just by putting them in prison, but by making sure no other family endures what ours did. Not alone. Never alone again. The applause was thunderous. Several survivors stood openly crying. Dorothy's hand squeezed mine as Rachel sat down her mission, 12 years in the making, finally complete. My daughter Jennifer would be so proud of what you've built here, Judge Robertson. Rachel added quietly. You've turned our worst nightmare into hope for others. Thank you for never giving up. For any of us. I looked across the Crowd Foundation beneficiaries who'd found safety volunteers, who'd found purpose donors, who'd found meaning in supporting something larger than themselves. The weight of grief hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into communal hope-shared mission legacy that would outlive us all. As sunset painted the valley in shades of orange and purple, guests began departing. Dorothy and I walked the hillside rows as twilight deepened our footsteps quiet on the soil. I used to think legacy was land and titles, I said, looking out over the valley. 5 generations of Robertsons working this vineyard. Now, I know it's the lives we touch. Elena and David live in every family. We help every victim who finds courage to fight back. Dorothy and I walked past the memorial garden as twilight deepened the bronze plaques catching the last rays of sunset. Then we continued toward the far edge of the property. There against the darkening sky, Catherine's oak stood ancient, enduring its massive trunk, silhouetted like a sentinel. The hawk carving was still visible after 40 years, wings spread in eternal protection. White roses now climbed the rough bark, Elena's favorite flowers, reclaiming the space where truth had been buried, and lies had tried to burn it all away. This is where it all started, isn't it? Dorothy asked softly, touching the trunk with gentle reverence. This is where I dug up the lockbox 2 years ago, where Elena left proof of her murder for me to find. I looked up at the hawk carving Catherine's hands preserved in wood. This is also where Mark tried to burn our family history 6 months ago, tried to erase everything: photographs, documents, memories, tried to turn our legacy to ash. But he failed. He failed. I ran my fingers over the hawk's wings. My grandmother said this tree would watch over our family forever. She was right. It protected Elena's evidence through 2 years of rain and wind. It survived Mark's gasoline and matches. It's still here, Dorothy, stronger than ever. We're still here. She tucked her hand through my arm. Your family wouldn't want you frozen in grief, Maxwell. Honoring them means living fully, not just existing. I looked at the white roses climbing toward the hawk, at this gentle woman beside me, who'd somehow found space in my broken heart without displacing those I'd lost, at the vineyard spreading around us in the fading light. I think I'm ready to try, I said quietly. Dorothy walked beside me silently for several minutes as we circled back toward the pavilion lights. As we stood beneath Catherine's oak, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my breath catch. About Mark Castellano's first victim. What is it? Dorothy noticed my expression. I opened the email, my hands suddenly unsteady. Judge Robertson, my name is Claire Donovan. Mark Castellano was married to my cousin Amanda before Jennifer Morrison. She died in 2008. I was 19 then, away at college. The police ruled it suicide. Amanda supposedly jumped from her apartment balcony after an argument with Mark. He collected $300,000 in life insurance and moved on. But after reading about your daughter's case and Jennifer Morrison's exhumation, I went through Amanda's belongings. I found her journal from the weeks before she died. She wrote about feeling constantly sick headaches, nausea, hair loss. She wrote that Mark was always making her special smoothies, insisting she drink them for her health. She wrote that she was afraid of him, but didn't know why. Judge Robertson, I think Mark poisoned Amanda just like he poisoned your daughter. Just like he poisoned Jennifer Morrison. I think she was too weak to fight when he pushed her off that balcony. I think my cousin was his first victim 18 years ago, and no one ever investigated. I have her journal. I have medical records. I have photos of Mark in her apartment the day she died. If you're willing to look into this, I'll provide everything. Amanda deserves justice too. Please. I stood in the cold February air holding proof that Mark Castellano's killing spree stretched back 18 years, not 12. Another victim. Another family waiting nearly 2 decades for answers. Another investigation that could consume whatever peace I'd finally found. Dorothy read over my shoulder. Are you going to look into it? And or Westbane I thought about Mark rotting in Pelican Bay with 3 consecutive life sentences. About the foundation helping 89 families. About Sophia Bennett studying to become a prosecutor. About Elena and David's legacy growing stronger every day. About standing here beneath Catherine's oak with Dorothy finally learning to laugh again after 2 years of grief and rage. No, I said quietly my decision, surprising even myself. Mark is serving 3 life sentences without parole. He'll die in that cell regardless of what happened in 2008. Adding another murder charge won't change his fate. And I've spent 2 years seeking justice, Dorothy. I think it's time I focused on living. Dorothy studied my face carefully. But what about Claire Donovan? What about Amanda's family? I replied to the email. Ms. Donovan, thank you for reaching out. I believe you. Your cousin Amanda likely was Mark Castellanos' first victim. However, I'm no longer investigating new cases. Mark is already serving 3 consecutive life sentences and will never leave prison. If you want justice for Amanda, I recommend contacting Jim Brennan. His contact information is public through the Foundation website. He can connect you with resources investigators and potentially reopen Amanda's case with new evidence. I'm sorry I can't help personally, but I've learned that seeking justice and seeking peace sometimes require different paths. I wish you and your family closure. Maxwell Robertson. I looked at the roses climbing Catherine's oak, their white petals ghostly in the fading light. Elena and David are at peace. So am I. Finally. If Claire Donovan wants to pursue Amanda's case, she has resources, but I'm done chasing ghosts. Dorothy smiled, understanding in her eyes. Your children would be proud of you, Maxwell. You've learned when to fight and when to let go. Together we walked back toward the pavilion lights, leaving the past where it belonged. The vineyard had survived. Our family had survived, and that I realized was victory enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this justice isn't always swift, but it can be certain. Looking back, I almost let grief consume me. Don't make my mistake of thinking vengeance and justice are the same. I wanted Mark dead, wanted him to suffer like Elena and David suffered. But that rage would have destroyed me, as surely as his poison destroyed my children. Methodical investigation, building evidence, trusting the system despite its flaws, that's what brought real justice. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any wound. It's the destruction of sacred trust. This family story isn't just about family betrayal twice over. It's how family betrayal becomes a catalyst for change. Every family story carries lessons, but this family story showed me healing is possible after unthinkable loss. I believe God put me through this for a reason, to show other families that purpose can emerge from pain. The foundation helped 89 families find justice and hope. That's the real victory. What would you have done in my position? Would you have pursued the investigation or let authorities handle it? If you've faced choosing between rage and justice, share your story below. If this touched you, subscribe for more stories about resilience and finding purpose after tragedy. Thank you for staying until the end. While based on real events, certain details have been fictionalized to emphasize the lesson. What matters is the truth at its heart, that justice, healing, and legacy are always possible even in our darkest moments.